Hey guys! Tonight we're climbing to the top of a temple in the dense, sticky heart of the rainforest. It's dark, but not empty above you. The stars stretch across the sky like a glittering net, tangled with purpose, blinking with secrets. You settle onto a cool stone platform, surrounded by silence and cicadas, and tilt your face to the heavens. If you squint, you might catch what the ancient Maya saw, not just pretty patterns, but order, movements, messages, and possibly instructions from the gods. But don't get too comfortable just yet. This isn't your friendly neighborhood observatory. There's no telescope, no retractable dome, and you definitely wouldn't survive a night up here without bug bites the size of mangoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift slightly on the stone, its surface still warm from the afternoon sun. Behind you, a stone stairway leads down into the jungle, swallowed quickly by darkness. But up here, it's all sky. The stars blink with intensity. They don't twinkle coyly. They stare. It's no wonder the Maya stared back, night after night. For centuries, your eyes adjust to the darkness, and soon patterns emerge. Not just Orion or the Big Dipper, no. The Maya had their own constellations. Some mirrored animals, others gods. One looks like a canoe gliding across the sky. Another resembles a long serpent. You don't recognize them, but you're not supposed to. The Maya weren't copying from Greek charts. They mapped the sky in their own language. Across the horizon, a temple roof comb peaks above the trees. It's not decorative. It's aligned precisely. That structure doesn't just hold ceremonies. It measures the sky. Every year, on certain days, the sun rises or sets directly in line with its edges. The architecture itself became the instrument. You lean back and try to imagine building an observatory without lenses, without satellites, just a chisel, a shadow, and centuries of notes carved into stone. Historians still argue whether these structures were designed purely for ritual or served as real observatories. But what's not in doubt is how precise they were. Some alignments are accurate to within a single degree. And the Maya didn't just do this once, they did it repeatedly, over generations. Try doing that without AutoCAD. A priest, well, really a sky priest, though nobody wore a name tag, would climb these steps just like you. Maybe with a bundle of scrolls tucked under one arm. Maybe just with memory. He'd stand here, night after night, tracking the movement of Venus, the shift of the stars, the rising of the Pleiades. He wouldn't call it astronomy. He'd call it listening. There's a long silence between sky shifts, and that's when the math happens. See, the Maya were obsessed with cycles. They didn't just want to know where Venus was tonight. They wanted to know where it would be in 8 years, on the same day, rising at the same time. And they figured it out. Long before trigonometry textbooks and armchair astrologers, with dots and bars carved into jade and bone. Beneath your feet, the stone plaza stretches wide. And you remember reading somewhere that it was built to track shadows. At midday, no shadow at all. But as the days shifted, shadows crept and danced and extended like fingers. Some temples even had carved markers, where certain shadows would fall only on equinoxes or solstices. If that sounds like a giant stone calendar, that's because it basically was. One odd little fact you won't find in your high school history class. Some Mayan stargazers may have used bowl-shaped mirrors of water to double the stars, watching reflections instead of the sky directly, which gave them a broader view, and maybe fewer neck cramps. Historians still debate the role of these tools. Were they symbolic, practical, decorative, or all three? In Mayan tradition, the line between ritual and science was like mist, soft, shifting, and never clearly divided. You hear a sound in the trees, probably an owl, or a howler monkey pretending to be a demon again. But up here, you're safe. The stars keep you company. You remember the first time someone showed you a sky map? All those names Sirius, Betelgeuse, Vega. Now imagine building a whole civilization without any of that, yet still getting the positions and cycles astonishingly right. You look again toward the east. Venus is due to rise soon. In Mayan lore, it wasn't just a planet. It was a warrior, sometimes a herald of peace. Other times of conflict, they tracked its cycle down to a fine-tuned 584-day orbit. No telescope, no calculator, just time, patience, and an incredible knack for numbers. The wind picks up slightly, and the jungle breathes. You wonder how many nights were spent this way, gazing upward, sketching lines in sand, whispering predictions, watching for omens. You imagine someone realizing, maybe for the first time, that the stars return, season after season, that the heavens could be read, like a book, if you just knew the language. You don't need a telescope tonight, just your eyes, and the memory of those who looked before you, waiting patiently for the sky to speak. You're still perched up high on that stone platform, the jungle humming quietly beneath you. But now the sky has shifted. The stars are higher, cooler, and the air carries a different kind of stillness. The kind that makes you feel like the world itself is pausing to listen. You stretch your legs a little, brushing aside a bit of moss that's made a home between the ancient stones. And then, just as your spine settles against the warm rock, it hits you. The Maya didn't just build observatories and temples. They turned the entire landscape into a sky-watching toolkit. Down below, between the dense canopies and winding stone roads, lie courtyards, causeways, and low platforms, all of it arranged with uncanny purpose. It's not just city planning, it's celestial choreography. Every angle, every corridor, every open space was part of a greater design to align with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. You walk slowly through a ceremonial plaza, the stones still warm underfoot. At first glance, it looks like a random scatter of buildings. But stand in the right place, just here, beside that column with the chipped edge, and you'll notice the line of sight opens perfectly to a temple across the way. The sun rises right over its roof on specific days of the year, and if you trace a line backward, you'd find that the plaza you're standing in is angled to frame that sunrise, not just aesthetically, but mathematically. Historians still argue whether every city was planned this way, or whether some of these alignments were happy accidents. But with so many examples, Uxmal, Copan, Tikal, Chichen Itza, it starts to look less like chance and more like cosmic intention. And not just with temples, even low platforms were sometimes laid out to face cardinal directions, or to align with particular stars that rose at dawn. You crouch beside a step pyramid that rises in a series of geometric terraces. Each level would have given a slightly different view of the sky. And some Mayan astronomers, let's be real, we'd probably call them engineers today, climbed these structures night after night, recording where stars rose and set, checking their observations against old codices, probably grumbling about cloud cover just like modern astronomers. But they didn't just use height. They used placement. One of the more peculiar practices involved creating paired structures set across from each other, where someone could stand in one and watch the celestial event line up with the other. Think of it like setting two buildings on a string and waiting for a planet to pass right over the thread. And if you're wondering how they knew where to build in the first place, the answer is deeply satisfying. They watched the sky first. Some of the oldest settlements have signs that their earliest structures weren't houses or walls. They were markers, possibly just wooden posts, placed in open fields. Early astronomers would stand between them, night after night, recording the sun's path, the moon's wobble, and the playful meander of Venus. There's something charmingly relatable about that. Imagine spending your life squinting at a dot in the sky, jotting down positions by torchlight, trying to convince the rest of your community that this dot really matters. But it did, because knowing when Venus would rise, or when the sun would pass over a certain point, wasn't just trivia. It dictated when to plant corn, when to hold ceremonies, when to prepare for war. You rest your hand on the cool surface of a stone wall, feeling the faint etching of glyphs under your fingers. Some are decorative. Others are records, dates, and names tied to specific celestial events. One carving shows a king performing a ritual under the image of a descending star. Historians believe this is likely Venus again, possibly its first evening appearance, or its symbolic rebirth. There's a level of cosmic drama here that would make even the boldest horoscope writer pause. One lesser-known tidbit: the Maya may have measured time using light beams cast through tiny windows at Uaxactun. For example, archaeologists found a series of 3 small temple-like structures that, when viewed from a fourth building, allowed observers to see the sun rise in precise positions on the solstices and equinoxes. It wasn't just observational, it was a permanent stone calendar, built into the city itself. Historians still debate whether these solar alignments were used solely for ritual or also for long-term tracking. Some say it was symbolic, reaffirming divine order. Others argue it was practical astronomy, used to calibrate calendars and confirm seasonal cycles. As usual, the answer is probably both. You find yourself drawn to a raised platform at the edge of the city, far from the main plaza. It's quieter here, simpler. But even now, you notice the faint alignment with the distant temple across the valley. If you were a Mayan sky watcher, tired of crowds and ceremonial duties, you might come out here to do your work in peace. Just you, your mind, and the cosmos. It's funny how so many civilizations, scattered across time and space, looked up and saw stories. The Maya weren't alone in that, but what sets them apart is how physically committed they were to mapping those stories into the very bones of their cities. Even today, if you fly over the old sites Tikal, Calakmul, Yakchailan, you'll notice the orientation. These aren't cities that grew randomly. They were shaped by heaven, directed by sky. As you lie back again on the stone platform, you try to imagine building your own home with a compass in one hand and a star chart in the other. Not because it's trendy, but because the heavens are your calendar, your clock, your reason. You take one last look at the moon, now high above you, and realize that someone 1,000 years ago watched it from this same spot, and probably thought the same thing you are now. Wow, that's beautiful, and it means something. Next, you'll see how the Maya didn't just measure the days they counted backwards through time itself, etching it into stone and tracking a universe that never stopped moving. The moon slips lower now, inching toward the treetops, and you shift on the stone ledge to stretch your legs. But you're not done. Not even close. Because while most people would be content tracking the stars from night to night, the Maya had other ideas. They didn't just want to know what time it was, they wanted to know what time had ever been, what it meant, and where it was headed. So naturally, they built stone calendars that counted backward into myth and mystery. You move through a wide ceremonial plaza, now ghost quiet. The stones beneath your feet worn smooth by centuries of steps. In the center stands a stela, a tall, narrow slab covered in glyphs. Some are names, others are dates, but not dates like Tuesday, May 4th. These are big, as in millennia big. Because here's the thing, the Maya had multiple calendars, layered like a cosmic onion, and the one that fascinates and confuses people the most is the long count. A calendar that starts not with the founding of a city or the birth of a king, but with the beginning of the world. Like, literally, the starting date, August 11th, 3114 BCE. Give or take a day, depending on which correlation you believe. Historians still argue about the exact match to our Gregorian system, which adds a fun layer of uncertainty to the whole affair. But regardless, the Maya believed that this was when the current world cycle began, not the birth of Earth, necessarily, but the current age of human experience, and from that point, They counted forward every single day, using a base 20 system.
Yep.
Base 20. They didn't count fingers, they counted fingers and toes. So instead of tens and hundreds, you've got baktuns, katuns, tons, winals, and kins. A kin is a day. A winal is 20 days. A tun is 360 days, because they favored elegant numbers over strict solar years, and so on. One baktun, about 394 years. Stack enough of those, and you're tracking time in chunks large enough to intimidate even a Swiss watchmaker. You pause in front of another monument. This one is older, more weathered. Its glyphs have been half erased by time, but some remain. It records a date 1,000 years before the stela was even carved. Why? Because the Maya loved anniversaries. They loved patterns. If something important happened 400 years ago, it might just happen again. There's a mathematical poetry to it. The long count isn't a linear stopwatch, it's a recurring spiral, looping and interlocking. This day, this star rise, this moon phase. They're not isolated events. They're part of a cosmic rhythm. If you knew where you were in the cycle, you knew what was coming next. Or at least, you could pretend to. Historians still debate whether this was true forecasting or just symbolic reverence. Were Mayan priests really predicting droughts and royal coups based on anniversary dates? Or were they drawing philosophical parallels? Like, this happened before. Maybe it matters again. Either way, their approach gave every moment a history and a destiny. You kneel beside a carved staircase, each step bearing a glyph. This was another way to track time with architecture. Some temples were built so that walking up them was like walking through a timeline. Step by step, day by day, up toward the stars. Literal time travel. In sandals. One fringe theory you might enjoy, though it's debated, is that some Mayan astronomers tracked multi-era cycles, predicting not just solar events, but the rise and fall of civilizations, the end of a baktun. They believed wasn't just a number reset, it was a cosmic reboot, kind of like finishing a season of a show you love, only to realize the next season is totally different. New characters, new drama, maybe even a new language. And yes, this is where the 2012 thing came from. Remember that. December 21st, 2012. The day the world was supposed to end. You chuckle now, but back then, people were stocking up on canned beans and crystal skulls. The truth, that date marked the end of the 13th baktun. A big deal, sure, but the Maya never said it meant apocalypse. More like ceremonial renewal, new cycle, maybe a cosmic reboot. Yes, but not a flaming meteor to the face. You pass a wall with rows of dates, each carved in loving detail. Some record births, others wars. Some are just celestial alignments, but they're not isolated. They're part of the long count web. Everything has a place, even if it's 500 years before the current king or 2,000 years into the past. And here's where it gets beautiful. The Maya weren't just mapping the sky, they were mapping memory. Their calendars held not just time, but stories, lineages, prophecies, the position of Venus on a king's birthday, the rising of Jupiter during a feast. These weren't coincidences, they were cosmic signatures. Historians still marvel at how accurate their calculations were. The long count system could pinpoint dates thousands of years away. It's like planning a birthday party in the year 5055. And somehow also knowing the moon will be waxing gibbous that night, all while using carved stone, and maybe some bark paper math notes. You step back and look at the broader city, remembering how every plaza, every staircase, every tower was built with this framework in mind. The calendars weren't hidden away. They were built into the experience of moving through the world. It makes you think, what if our cities were like that? What if your office building had a hallway that lit up only on equinoxes? What if your front door aligned to the winter solstice sunset? It's almost like the Maya wanted their people to live inside time, not just pass through it. You stretch again, glancing up at the sky. The stars still hang there, patient and unchanged. But now, when you look at them, you don't just see dots of light. You see milestones, markers, part of a clock that ticks not by hours or minutes, but by baktuns and sacred patterns. Next, we'll follow Venus on her shimmering journey through the heavens, and see why Mayan astronomers gave this diva planet so much VIP attention. The sky turns soft blue at the edges, the stars fading like candle flames before dawn. But one light still burns bright, sharper than the rest, low on the eastern horizon. It's not a star. You already know what it is. Venus. The Maya called it Chak-ek, the great star. And to them, it wasn't just another speck in the sky. It was the celestial diva, the unpredictable, dramatic, and sometimes dangerous guest star in the theater of the heavens. You shift your weight on the temple steps, watching Venus flicker above the treetops. She's rising as the morning star now, bold and radiant, but just as easily, she'll vanish again, then reappear in the evening like nothing happened. This, to the Maya, was not random. It was a pattern, a cycle, a message, and they tracked it so well. You'd think they had telescopes hidden in the thatched roofs. Spoiler, they didn't. Just patience, obsession, and the mathematical equivalent of chewing through a brick wall with your bare teeth. You turn toward the east-facing observatory, its walls still partially intact. Here's where it happened, night after night of stargazing. Scribes making tick marks in bark paper books, priests muttering prayers, watching Venus go dark. Then, bright again. They recorded every phase of its 584-day cycle with the kind of devotion normally reserved for celebrity gossip columns. And yes, they knew it was a planet, not a star. They just didn't care about definitions. To them, Venus was a god, or a warrior, or an omen, or all three, depending on when and where it showed up. Historians still argue whether Venus's movements were tied more to agriculture or to warfare, but many agree that the Maya believed certain appearances of Venus, especially when it first rose as the morning star, were linked to violence, sacrifice, or upheaval. There are whole stelae carved with dates where kings waged wars timed to the planet's rising. Like celestial choreography with very sharp props, you pause beside one such monument. It shows a ruler dressed in feathers and jade, holding a spear. Below him, the symbol for Venus. Not a coincidence. Some scholars believe major battles were deliberately planned to coincide with Venus events, giving the attacks divine sanction. If Venus was watching, you had cosmic backing, or at least plausible deniability. But it wasn't all blood and thunder. Venus also had a role in sacred timekeeping. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains an entire section devoted to Venus, complete with tables calculating when it would rise and set for years. It accounts for its time as morning star, its disappearance behind the sun, its reappearance as evening star, and its vanishing act again. And here's the kicker. These observations were so accurate, they calculated the average Venus cycle to within less than a day of modern science. All that, with no lenses, just chalk, bark paper, and the stubborn brilliance of generations of sky watchers. You walk through the ruined observatory and spot a window narrow, almost too small to be useful. But it's not random. It's aimed precisely at the point on the horizon where Venus appears during one part of its cycle. This wasn't for general viewing. It was for targeted observation, a single glimpse, once every few hundred days, at just the right time. The Maya knew Venus didn't behave like the sun or moon. It disappeared, changed brightness, danced around the sky with no clear schedule. But they found the pattern underneath. And not just for one cycle, they tracked multiple cycles at once, combining them with the solar year and lunar phases, like juggling fire while standing on a moving platform, blindfolded. One quirky theory suggests that they may have used sighted tools made of wood, kind of like a fixed cross frame, allowing them to sight Venus across a flat edge. No magnification, but precision by alignment. If you could find two fixed points and draw an imaginary line, Venus's path became easier to pin down. No gears, just geometry. You look down at your feet, imagining the marks made in the earth. Chalk lines, burned sticks stuck into dirt, and then the results written into codices and carved into stone. If Venus rose a few days earlier than expected, that wasn't just a data error. That was a sign. Historians still debate what Venus's appearances actually signified. War, peace, fertility, death, maybe all of it. Maybe the interpretation changed based on the direction of its rise, the proximity to other celestial events, or the needs of the priesthood at the time. One day, it's a goddess bringing harmony. The next, a spear in the sky. You glance again at the horizon. Venus is rising higher now, its light shimmering just a bit in the dawn haze. It really is unnerving how bright it gets. So bright, in fact, that it can cast shadows in complete darkness. And imagine being a Mayan farmer or priest, watching that happen, wondering what it meant. You walk slowly toward the temple courtyard, where Venus was often honored with ceremonies sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic. There are reports of offerings made during its first morning appearance, timed precisely, even to the hour. What did they offer? Probably corn, maybe feathers, possibly blood. It depends on the occasion and the ruler's mood. And no, they didn't think Venus would punish them if they missed a ceremony. But the Maya didn't take chances. To them, order was sacred. The heavens operated on a rhythm, and if you wanted your society to thrive, your rituals had to stay in step with the stars. You sit now near the base of a stela, carved in the shape of a T-shape. Some say a Venus glyph. You trace the edges, now worn smooth, and wonder if someone else once sat here, 1,000 years ago, waiting for that same morning star to rise. Maybe he had a bowl of cacao. Maybe he was tired, but he looked up, saw that light, and whispered, "There you are again, right on time." Next, we'll follow the Maya as they turned their attention to another moving mystery in the sky, the ever-shifting moon, and how its phases shaped everything from farming to festivals to fear. The morning haze settles into the treetops, and the last trace of Venus fades as the eastern sky begins to glow gold. But just because the sun is rising doesn't mean the Mayan astronomers were done for the day. Not by a long shot. Because while Venus got its own special treatment, the moon was the nightly regular, the dependable, moody neighbor in the cosmic apartment complex. And to the Maya, she wasn't just a glowing disk in the sky. She was a timekeeper, a calendar, and sometimes a warning sign with very bad news. You walk through a quiet clearing where once moonlit rituals were performed, dances, songs, maybe even sacrifices, all timed to the rhythms of the moon. She waxed and waned like clockwork, and the Maya knew it, tracked it, plotted it, and used it to run a surprisingly complex schedule of agriculture, prophecy, and party planning. Above, the moon hangs faintly in the pale daylight, barely visible, like a ghost lingering past its bedtime. But you squint and imagine her at her brightest, full, round, and powerful. The Maya had names for her phases, and more importantly, roles. In some stories, she was a goddess, sometimes young and beautiful, sometimes older and less forgiving. Historians still argue about the exact role the moon played in Mayan cosmology. Was she a fertility symbol? A divine calendar? A celestial counterweight to the sun? Probably yes to all of it, depending on the city, the era, and the current ruler's preferred mythos. But the astronomy, that part is wonderfully grounded. Mayan astronomers tracked the synodic month. That's the time between two full moons, with stunning accuracy. They clocked it at about 5 days, which, by the way, is almost exactly what modern astronomers measure with telescopes and atomic clocks. The Maya figured this out with sticks and sky, probably while chewing on tamales. You step into the shadow of a round observatory building, yes, round, which is pretty rare in Mayan architecture. One of the best-known examples is at Chichen Itza, often called El Caracol, or the Snail, because of its spiral staircase. Its windows, they don't face just anywhere. They're angled to track the moon, Venus, and solstices. A building that literally listens to the sky. Inside, it's cooler, quiet. The air smells like dust and history. You imagine a priest kneeling here with a codex, watching the moon through a narrow slit in the wall. Not just admiring her beauty, but measuring her movements, logging when she rose, how high she traveled, and what stars she passed along the way. And here's the thing. They didn't just watch full moons. They tracked new moons, crescent moons, gibbous moons. They cared about when the moon disappeared. 2, because to them, darkness meant something. Sometimes something ominous, one fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the Maya associated lunar eclipses with danger, especially for rulers. A sudden darkening of the moon wasn't just a cool science moment. It was an omen, a cosmic slap on the wrist. Imagine throwing a royal feast and then bam, moon goes dark. Everyone gasps, and suddenly the king's sweating into his jaguar robe. To prepare for eclipses, astronomers recorded patterns over time, noting when eclipses had occurred in the past, and trying to predict their return. It wasn't perfect, but they came awfully close. The Dresden Codex contains eclipse tables, yes, full-blown prediction charts, carved and painted by candlelight. These weren't casual doodles. They were mathematical prophecies, designed to warn people when the heavens might turn temporarily against them. You wander now through a crop field, long abandoned, but once lush with maize and squash. These fields were often planted in rhythm with the moon, especially in communities that relied heavily on rain-fed agriculture. A waxing moon might suggest growth, a waning moon, time to harvest, and a full moon during planting season. Let's just say, a good sign for the tamale forecast. Historians still debate how strict these lunar calendars were. Some argue they were mostly symbolic. Others say they were deeply practical, embedded in everyday choices. One thing's for sure. When the moon said jump, a lot of people in the lowlands asked how high. You pause by a carving on a temple wall. It shows a figure, possibly a goddess, pouring water from a jar, with a crescent moon above her head. That might represent the moon bringing rain, or fertility, or time itself. Mayan iconography is notoriously layered. Sometimes a symbol has 3 meanings at once, and none of them cancel the others out. And while the moon's path was known and studied, it still wasn't fully trusted. There are stories where lunar deities are tricksters, or captives, or even hunted by celestial dogs. In one myth, the moon goddess is punished for breaking rules. In another, she escapes to the sky, always one step ahead of the sun. It's less about facts and more about feelings. The sky as an emotional landscape. You lie down in the grass now, hands behind your head, and try to feel what they must have felt. That gentle awe, that regularity, that beauty. No light pollution, no planes, just the slow glow of the moon, waxing and waning, setting the tone for months, years, even lifetimes. And somewhere, a priest draws a line in the dirt, marks a date, and whispers a chant, not because he wants to control the moon, but because he wants to stay in sync. Next, we'll walk among temples that weren't just built to impress. They were built to track the stars, with corners and corridors aimed like telescopes carved from limestone. You're walking through the remains of a temple complex now, the kind where every step seems to echo with the weight of purpose. The sun's higher now, brushing the edges of the uppermost stones with gold, and the birds have taken over the morning shift. But even with all this bustle, you can't shake the sense that this place isn't random. that the stones under your feet were arranged not just for gods and kings, but for the stars. You pause between two tall structures, their shapes long since softened by time and vines. But stand still, squint a little, and you notice something. The gap between them lines up perfectly with the rising sun. Not every day, just certain days, the kind you plan rituals around. Welcome to the Maya's second telescope. Buildings, you heard me right? They built stone structures that worked like star trackers. Not the spinning observatories we think of today, but solid alignments, temples, doorways, corridors, even stairs that framed celestial events with unnerving precision. You crouch beneath a triangular archway, just wide enough for one person to pass through. If you'd been here on the spring equinox, you would have seen the sun rise directly through this opening, casting a beam of light like a cosmic laser across the courtyard. It wouldn't hit just anywhere. It would land on a specific altar, or a carved panel, or even a king's throne. Historians still argue whether this was just architectural flair, or if it served deeper scientific purpose. But with hundreds of these alignments scattered across the Maya world, from Palenque to Tikal to Copan, it seems unlikely it was just aesthetic. These people weren't decorating, they were calculating. One standout example, the Temple of the Seven Dolls at Jibel Khaltoum. During the equinoxes, the sun rises through a door in the temple and lines up with another structure down a causeway, as if someone tied a solar string between them. It's breathtaking and weirdly humble. The temple itself isn't grand. It's short, almost stubby, but it does one job perfectly: track the sun. And the Maya didn't stop with the sun. Oh no, they mapped the horizon for moonrises, Venus events, and even appearances of constellations. Some buildings face a slightly off true north, not by mistake, but to catch a specific star's rising point. Imagine adjusting an entire temple so you can watch a glowing dot hit a notch between two stones once a year. You walk up a wide stairway now, worn smooth in the center. At the top, the view opens not to the city, but to the distant tree line. Why? Because on certain nights, from this spot, a particular star would rise just above that exact patch of trees. The building behind you, it's angled to frame it. The room at the top, empty except for one narrow window, a star window. There's something almost eerie about it, like you're stepping into the quiet end of a telescope made of limestone. The Maya didn't need glass. They had alignment. They had patience, and they had thousands of years of sky-watching practice passed down through priest astronomers who probably had neck cramps for life. You step into the shadow of a temple wall and run your fingers along a carved line etched into the stone. It's not decorative. It's a sight line, a guide. There's a matching line on the opposite wall, and if you trace them together, they intersect at a spot on the horizon where, guess what? The sun sets on the solstice. And this isn't even a dedicated observatory. This is just part of a staircase. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Did every Maya city have buildings like this? Or was it a specialty of elite ceremonial centers? Evidence suggests even small settlements used basic versions: wooden posts, mound alignments, and standing stones arranged to mark key events. It wasn't always grand, but it was always precise. You duck into a chamber just below one of the roof combs. It's dark, cool, and oddly echoey. A niche in the back wall glows faintly. You realize it's a light trap. A small opening allows sunlight in only on specific days. On those mornings, the beam would hit a carved glyph and illuminate it like it was on fire. A divine spotlight. And sometimes the opposite happened. Shadow was the star at Chichen Itza's famous El Castillo pyramid. On the equinoxes, the descending sun casts triangular shadows on the staircase that line up with the serpent carving at the base. It looks like a snake made of shadow slithering down the pyramid. I mean, if your architecture's not summoning cosmic reptiles, are you even trying? There's a fringe theory out there, yes. One of those that some of these structures may have also marked supernova or meteor showers. There are glyphs that might represent unexpected sky events. Historians still argue whether the Maya recorded things like novas or comet appearances with specific architecture, or if those events were simply folded into existing sky stories. Either way, the buildings would have made perfect platforms for watching surprises. You step back out into the open, sun warming your skin now. The city spreads around you, ruins and roots, vines creeping through cracked doorways. But everywhere you turn, you see patterns, angles, lines of sight. The Maya didn't just live in cities, they lived in instruments. And every solstice, every equinox, every Venus rise was built into the experience of walking. Imagine walking through your neighborhood and knowing exactly what time of year it was just by how the light hit your doorway, or whether the sun peeked through your kitchen window, or how long your shadow stretched down the hallway. You sit now on a step warmed by the sun across the plaza. A row of columns lines up like dominoes toward the east. The birds are back, somewhere in the trees. A monkey screeches like it's narrating a daytime soap opera, but you close your eyes for a moment and imagine the moment the sun hits the temple edge exactly, without fail, and a priest lifts his head, smiles slightly, and notes, right on time. Next, we'll dive into how the Maya used numbers, beans, and bones to build an elegant math system that could track time, stars, and cycles without ever needing a chalkboard. You're sitting now under a shady wooden canopy strung between the edges of a half-collapsed wall. The air is heavy with the smell of warm earth, and the ground beneath you is scattered with bits of old ceramic, pebbles, and something that catches your eye, a small carved dot in stone. And next to it, a bar. It doesn't seem like much at first, but then you realize you're looking at the building blocks of Mayan math, a system so elegant, so deceptively simple. It could track the heavens themselves with just dots, lines, and the occasional conch shell. You pick up a stick and start drawing in the dirt. 1 dot, 2 dots, 3, 4, and then a line for 5. Add a second line, 10, then a third, a fourth, a single dot above that, 21. Congratulations, you're now counting the Maya way. And no, you don't need a calculator, just some beans and a very patient attitude. This isn't just counting crops or pottery shards, though. The Maya used this system to track time, stars, and celestial cycles that repeat over hundreds, even thousands of years. Why dots and bars? Because it worked, and because it's easy to see at a glance. You don't need to squint at tiny numerals, you just count the marks. Their system was vigesimal base 20, probably because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, unlike our base 10, which resets every time we hit a 10. Mayan numbers stack vertically, with each level representing increasing powers of 22. And yes, it gets a little spicy at the third tier, because the calendar uses 360 instead of 400 as the third level value, just to keep things in sync with the solar year. Historians still argue whether this adjustment was purely mathematical or had deeper ritual significance. Did they tweak their base system just to make the calendar more elegant? Or was it a cosmic compromise, math meeting myth in the middle? And here's the coolest part. They had 0. That's right. Long before 0 showed up in Europe, the Maya had a shell symbol to represent it, a placeholder, a nothing. But in the most mathematically useful way, this little seashell glyph allowed them to write massive numbers without confusion. It also meant they could calculate dates across millennia, something the Romans couldn't dream of doing with their I's and V's. You lean back against the stone wall, thinking about what it would take to chart the orbit of Venus, or predict an eclipse using just these bars and dots. It's not just impressive. It's kind of ridiculous. In the best way, imagine tracking a 584-day cycle over centuries without computers, software, or even graph paper. Just beans, bark paper, and some really intense concentration. And yes, they actually used beans in daily calculations, especially in teaching and record-keeping. Some think they laid them out in grids like early abacuses, shifting them around on mats. They may also have used knotted cords, similar to the Inca quipu, though this is still debated. Imagine doing your taxes with string and legumes. Actually, don't. You wander over to a set of stone steps where a scribe once sat, probably surrounded by folded codices, painted books made of bark. These codices weren't random doodles. They were almanacs, astronomical tables, prophetic guides, and they used the dot and bar math system to calculate dates of eclipses, lunar cycles, feast days, and even times for war or royal coronations. One lesser-known tidbit. There are records of the Maya counting backwards in their calendar, not just forward. They calculated dates in the past centuries before their own time, and noted what celestial conditions would have been like. Just for context, just for cosmic symmetry, the level of astronomical FOMO is real. Historians still debate whether these calculations were intended for practical use or just intellectual flexing. Did the average farmer care about what phase the moon was in 400 years ago? Probably not. But the scribes, the sky priests, they absolutely did. And they wrote it all down, sometimes in buildings, sometimes on stelae, sometimes in books that, sadly, mostly didn't survive. Only 4 complete codices remain today. 4 out of possibly hundreds. The rest were destroyed, often by colonial priests who believed them to be works of evil. One friar wrote that they burned great numbers of books because they were full of superstition. Ironic, considering the math inside those books could outpace much of what Europe was doing at the time. You glance down again at your dirt drawing. You've made it to 240 without breaking a sweat. You stack another bar and dot. 261. That's the number of days in the Tzolk'in, the sacred calendar. It governed ritual events, birth names, agricultural rites. It's a curious length, neither lunar nor solar. Scholars think it might be linked to the human gestation period. Yes, a calendar possibly based on pregnancy. That's just poetic. But the Maya didn't use just one calendar. They used several at once, layered like birthday cakes of time. The Hab was the solar calendar. Days. The Tzolk'in, sacred 260. Together, they formed a cycle called the calendar round, a combination of dates that only repeated every 52 years. That's a lot of dots and bars, friend. And they tracked it all manually. No apps, no batteries, just intellect and determination. It's like building a spaceship with driftwood and duct tape, and then watching it actually fly. You stand now in the center of a courtyard, surrounded by numbers carved, painted, and probably once read aloud to crowds waiting for festival dates or prophecies. Each number tells a story, not just of time, but of how time moves, like a river, flowing through hands that knew exactly how to measure its rhythm with dots, lines, and a little bit of shell-shaped nothing. Next, we'll open one of those sacred almanacs and meet the Mayan sky priests, who turned daily observations into holy schedules and carried the heavens in their folded books. You're standing now in the shadow of a low stone building, no taller than a single story, and from the outside, it looks humble. Just another ruin blending into the warm jungle haze. But inside, this was once the brain of the city, a chamber filled with folded pages, painted symbols, candle smoke, and quiet murmurs. This is where the sky priests worked, the keepers of calendars, the interpreters of omens, the librarians of stars. They didn't just study the heavens. They carried them between 2 bark paper covers. You step inside, or what's left of it. There's no roof now, just sky and vines pushing in, but the walls still whisper. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the faint rustle of codices being flipped open, page by careful page. These weren't books like we have today. They were accordion-folded manuscripts, painted by hand on model, a kind of bark paper coated with lime to make it smooth and bright, fragile, yes, but packed with data, star charts, dates, instructions for sacrifices, and schedules for everything from agricultural festivals to royal ascensions. One of the most famous surviving examples is the Dresden Codex, now preserved far from the land that birthed it. It's not large, only about 39 pages, but within its folds is a world, eclipse tables, Venus cycles, rituals for rain gods, and astronomical math so precise it still stuns researchers. You kneel beside a stone table, and for a moment, imagine a priest seated here face-painted, hands stained with ink, a tiny brush made from animal hair in one hand, a codex cradled in the other. He's not just copying data, he's interpreting it, deciding what it means, choosing when to speak, and when to let the sky speak for itself. Historians still argue about whether every Mayan city had codices like the Dresden. Some believe only the largest ceremonial centers produced them. Others think regional almanacs may have existed localized guides tailored to different stars, latitudes, or farming conditions. But the priests, they were trained to read them all, often from a young age, possibly through apprenticeships or family lines. You walk over to a carved bench, the edges worn by elbows and time. This is where predictions would be delivered, not shouted from rooftops, but spoken quietly to leaders, to farmers, to anyone who came seeking cosmic clarity. If your child was born on 8 beaten 12 yaks, the priest might consult the codex and tell you their fate. Clever, stubborn, unlucky in maze, but blessed with dreams. If a king wanted to plan a campaign, the priest would trace the calendar cycles and whisper, "Wait 3 days, Venus is not yet ready." And if you're imagining some stern old man in a feathered robe wagging a finger, adjust your mental image. The priests were scientists, yes, but also storytellers, artists, sometimes tricksters. They weren't robotic calculators. They were people who saw the emotional rhythm of time and tried to give it meaning. You brush your hand along the base of the wall, where the remains of a mural cling to the stone. A figure stands beneath a sky dotted with red and white glyphs. It's not just art. It's a calendar. Some glyphs represent days, others gods. One holds a bundle of maize, another carries a burning torch. The entire mural is a forecast, like a wall-sized version of a weather app, only far more poetic and possibly a little terrifying. The codices contained similar information, but more condensed. They laid out ritual schedules: when to plant, when to harvest, when to offer cocoa to the gods, and when to maybe hide under your bed and wait for a celestial disaster to pass. One page might feature a repeating table of moon phases, with red dots warning of eclipses. Another might show god figures stacked in columns, each ruling over a 20-day cycle. The sky wasn't random, it was staffed. Historians still debate how widely codices were shared. Some believe each city had a master copy, guarded like a treasure. Others think priests made multiple working versions, like annotated planners, customized for different temples or lineages. What's clear is that few people outside the priestly class could read them. The glyphs weren't simple. They were dense, symbolic, and layered with metaphor. Reading one page could take hours, interpreting it, a lifetime. You notice a small stone basin in the corner, possibly an inkwell, or maybe a water bowl used in ritual. Either way, it's worn smooth, like it knew the rhythm of fingers dipping in and out. The ink itself was made from natural pigments: red from cinnabar, black from charcoal and plant resins, blue from the legendary Maya blue, a pigment so durable it's still baffling chemists today. And what did they write with? Tiny brushes, often made from squirrel hair or agave fibers. The strokes had to be fine, deliberate. Each glyph mattered, each curve of a serpent tail, each dot of a deity's eye. It wasn't just writing. It was sacred geometry. You sit now on the edge of a low wall, thinking about the people who once walked these halls. They didn't just see the sky as a backdrop. They saw it as a script, and the codices were the program. Following the stars wasn't superstition, it was survival. Rituals weren't optional. They were part of cosmic maintenance, like winding the universe's clock every morning. And when something strange happened, a blood moon, a meteor, a long absence of rain, it wasn't just bad luck, it was a message. The codex had to be consulted. The priests had to compare dates. They didn't panic. They read, they interpreted, and they responded with action offerings, calendar adjustments, new ceremonies, a dialogue with the sky. You exhale slowly. The jungle thick with mid-morning light now. The codices are mostly gone. The priests long silent. But the sky, still there, still turning. And in some small way, their folded books of bark and stars are still open, still watching, still whispering to anyone willing to read between the glyphs. Next, you'll step into the story-rich world of Mayan constellations, where the sky isn't filled with bears and hunters, but with macaws, serpents, and celestial turtles you've definitely never heard of. You're lying flat now in a quiet clearing, staring up at the deep blue sky just beginning to dim with the approaching evening. The air is still. The cicadas have paused, and in that lull just before the first star peeks out, you start to see it. The sky as a canvas, not for Orion or Cassiopeia or the Big Dipper, but for creatures you've never heard of. Shapes that don't match your childhood stargazing guides. Because the Maya didn't just look up and name the stars, they told stories with them, and their constellations. Oh, they were wild. Right overhead, where you might expect to see some Western constellation like Taurus or Gemini, the Maya saw a cosmic macaw, yes, a bird, colorful, loud, and dramatic, perched right in the Milky Way. Not just chilling, either. In some versions, this macaw was a god, or perhaps a fallen one. Sometimes it got shot out of the sky by a hero. Sometimes it ruled from the stars, and that's your first clue. Mayan constellations weren't just labels. They were myths mapped to the sky, full of drama, danger, and divine flair. You sit up slowly, brushing leaves from your back, and start to trace the faint beginning of the Milky Way to the Maya. This river of stars wasn't just a pretty backdrop. It was the world tree, or a celestial road, or a place where spirits traveled. In some traditions, it was a crocodile. Yes, a giant celestial croc slinking across the night. Kind of makes our great bear seem tame, doesn't it? Historians still argue about how widespread or consistent these constellations were. Did all Maya cities recognize the same sky shapes? Or did different regions create their own myths, like local accents in the language of stars? There's no universal Mayan star map, but the themes repeat: animals, gods, death, and rebirth. One of the most important constellations wasn't even a star group. It was a dark patch in the Milky Way, just above the Southern Cross, where we might see emptiness. The Maya saw the Xibalba be the black road, the entrance to the underworld. Think about that. Where we named the bright bits, they found meaning in the shadows. The absence of light wasn't emptiness. It was a doorway. You shift again, and find a low platform nearby. Once used for sky-watching ceremonies, this wasn't about mathematics now. This was about storytelling. You can imagine a priest or elder pointing up and tracing the path of the cosmic turtle, the one who carried the 3 hearth stones of creation. And yes, these 3 stones weren't metaphorical. They were stars, likely including Orion's belt. In Mayan lore, the hearthstones were where the gods first created fire, time, and corn. You can almost hear it now. A soft voice telling a child, "That one, that's where the first fire was lit. That's why we plant during the full moon near those stars." Practical and mythical, all in one story, one lesser-known constellation. The death bat, not as cuddly as it sounds. It's part of a series of star myths tied to underworld creatures. The Maya had an entire roster of celestial beasties, many of them pulled from the Popol Vuh, their creation epic. If you haven't read it, Picture a high-stakes sibling adventure featuring trickster gods, monster ball games, decapitations, and a whole lot of cosmic reboots. The constellations were like a nightly Popol Vuh, retold with every sunset. As new stars rose, new chapters unfolded. You scan the sky now as more stars emerge. The familiar constellations most of us grew up with seem muted, irrelevant here. Instead, you imagine a great snake slithering across the eastern sky, the celestial serpent, said to carry the gods between worlds. In some stories, it devours stars. In others, it gives birth to them. It all depends on the season and the ritual. Historians still debate the identity of some Mayan constellations, with only fragmentary texts. Much of the sky must be reconstructed from murals, codices, and hints in colonial period records. Some scholars believe the Maya had over a dozen distinct constellations, many tied to the agricultural calendar, myth cycles, and the rituals of kingship. You lie back down now, letting the stars fill your view completely. There's something grounding about this, knowing that long before smartphones and sky apps, people could look up and see stories, not to explain things away, but to give life meaning. And these weren't bedtime tales, either. The Maya used these star myths to time real events. If the turtle constellation rose in a certain position, that might mean it was time to plant maize. If the death bat lingered too long in the sky, perhaps a warning illness, war, drought. The heavens were a drama, but also a calendar in code. You glance toward the west, where a faint star twinkles low to the horizon. Maybe it was once the eye of a celestial jaguar, or a lost soul escaping the underworld. The Maya didn't need to agree on the details. What mattered was that the sky was alive. And unlike our modern obsession with constellations as static outlines, the Maya focused on how constellations moved, how they interacted with each other across the night and year. A jaguar might rise above the world tree one season, only to disappear behind the black road the next. Like characters entering and exiting a stage, you smile at the thought of an ancient storyteller pointing at a cluster of stars, spinning a tale that blended astronomy, spirituality, and just the right amount of cosmic gossip. That wasn't just education. It was enchantment, and as the stars wheel gently overhead, you start to understand. The Maya didn't just map the heavens, they inhabited them. Every night, every season, every generation. Next, we'll explore how entire Mayan cities were aligned to starlight. Their streets, plazas, and pyramids built to match the movement of these celestial myths. The stars are out in full force now, and your gaze drops from the night sky back to the stone paths beneath your feet. You start to notice something subtle, something that wasn't obvious during the day. These streets aren't pointing north or east. Not exactly. They veer a little, just enough to make you curious. And then it clicks. This entire city was built to match the sky. Every temple, every plaza, every causeway is tilted not by accident, but by design pointed toward the stars. You take a slow walk down a broad stone path, worn smooth by centuries of sandals and bare feet. It runs slightly northeast, cutting through the heart of what was once a bustling city. Ahead, a pyramid looms angled just off the cardinal points. Why? Because on certain days, certain stars would rise right over its peak. This wasn't a mistake. This was architecture that obeyed the cosmos. Historians still argue how much planning went into these layouts. Were the cities built entirely around celestial events? Or did the Maya tweak alignments only for major temples and ceremonial routes? The debate continues, but the evidence is everywhere, from the Yucatan to Guatemala to Belize. These weren't just cities. They were star charts you could live in. You reach a central plaza and glance around. Every building, every step, feels like it's facing something specific, something just over the horizon. You're standing in a map that's less about geography and more about time, because the Maya weren't interested in permanence. They were interested in syncing with cycles. One standout example: the city of Copan. Its main temple axis aligns with the rising of the sun on particular festival days. Another example: the ancient city of Sebal, where certain structures line up with the appearance of Venus in its various phases. You can't help but smile. These weren't buildings, they were instruments. You walk toward a small platform at the edge of the plaza. From here, you can see the broad sweep of the city. Some buildings form triangles, others form perfect sight lines, and some even seem to mirror constellations. One theory, still a bit fringe, but very fun, suggests that certain Maya cities were laid out to mirror the sky itself, like a reflection on Earth. Pause here and imagine what that means. You're walking in a place that doesn't just face the stars, it embodies them. Every sunrise, every full moon, every appearance of Venus had a place to land, like a spotlight hitting its mark on a stage built by astronomer architects. You rest your hand on a worn stone marker. It's low and nondescript, but it's not random. It's one of many such markers thought to be horizon points, where priests or astronomers would stand and observe the sky. No telescope needed, just alignment, patience, and a really good memory. What's amazing is that many of these alignments are still accurate. After all these centuries, on the right day, you can still stand here and watch the sun rise between two distant temple tops, exactly as it was meant to. It's like the city is still breathing, still keeping time. Even if the people are gone, there's a curious structure near the center. A pair of narrow buildings with long corridors running parallel. You walk between them and realize that, once a year, the setting sun shines straight through both like a laser guiding light across a sacred line. This may have marked an equinox or the start of a rainy season. It may also have triggered festivals, offerings, or the planting of maize. The Maya weren't content to build with bricks and mortar. They built with sunlight and shadow, with star paths and planetary rhythms. If a building didn't align with something celestial, it was probably a granary or a bathroom. One lesser-known but beautiful detail: some stelae, those tall, carved stone pillars, weren't just history markers. They were sky anchors. Many are oriented so that, when viewed from a temple platform, they line up with solstices or lunar events. Imagine reading history not just by date, but by star position. Historians still debate whether the Maya used models or simulations when designing cities. Did they use scale diagrams, shadow tracking devices, wooden mock-ups of the skyline? Or was it all done through ritual observation, passed down through generations of sky watchers? The mystery remains, but the precision cannot be denied. You step now into a long corridor, flanked by stone columns. The air is cooler here. At the far end, a small window glows faintly. On just 2 days each year, sunlight passes through that opening and lights up a glyph on the opposite wall. It's subtle, easy to miss, but it's proof that the entire corridor was built to wait for the light. There's something deeply calming about that, this idea that a space can sit still for 363 days, doing nothing, and then, for 2 perfect mornings, it fulfills its cosmic purpose. A reminder that even buildings can be patient. You return to the plaza. As the stars deepen overhead, the Milky Way stretches now from one horizon to the other. You picture it mirrored on the ground, the city as a constellation in stone. Maybe it wasn't just for ceremony. Maybe it was a way of telling the gods, "We see you, we're listening, we're building in your image." And that thought that ancient cities could be acts of cosmic devotion, not just function and form, makes your surroundings feel a little more alive. These aren't ruins, they're celestial instruments, still humming quietly in tune with the night. Next, we'll follow the builders who made this possible. The architects who waited for the stars to move before laying a single stone. The stars haven't shifted much since you last looked up. But now your gaze turns downward toward the foundations of things. Because while stargazing priests may have told the heavens when to expect them, someone had to actually build the platforms, temples, and perfectly angled corridors. Someone had to lug stones up muddy hills, chisel glyphs, and get measurements right using sticks and shadows. Welcome to the quiet world of Mayan astronomers, those humble geniuses who waited for the stars to move before laying a single stone. You find yourself walking the edge of an ancient construction site, or what's left of one. Here, under a layer of vines and moss, lie the remains of a project that spanned seasons, maybe even generations. Not every temple was built in a frenzy. Some had to wait for the sky to be just right. A single solstice shadow might determine where the first cornerstone would go. If the sun rose 1 finger width too far to the left, the whole plan had to shift. You spot a row of flattened stones forming a faint line in the earth. This was likely a sight line, used to track celestial events. A stick would be planted at each end, and over days, sometimes months, the builders would observe the shadows, track star risings, and record light angles on bits of bark or in dust. Once everything lined up just right, construction could begin. Historians still debate whether every building required such astronomical vetting. It's unlikely that someone measured the sky to build a broom closet. But for temples, plazas, observatories, absolutely. There are records and inscriptions that talk about laying the eye of the day, a poetic way of saying the sun told us where to build. The builders didn't work in isolation. They collaborated with priests, scribes, and sky watchers, kind of like a team where your lead engineer is also a part-time astrologer, and your project manager insists you pause for a Venus rising. Somehow, it worked. You stop beside a chunk of broken staircase and trace its angle. From here, the sun would rise directly along its edge on a specific day in the Hab calendar. The alignment would light a path from the base of the temple to its summit. If someone was standing up top in ceremonial garb, bathed in golden light, that wasn't a lucky accident. That was choreography. What's amazing is that many of these structures weren't even the first ones in their spot. Often, new temples were built on top of older ones, but not just to expand or decorate. Sometimes they were adjusted to reflect shifting star alignments. Because, spoiler, the sky doesn't stay still. Over centuries, the Earth's tilt and wobble caused subtle shifts in the stars' positions. The Maya noticed, and in some cases, they rebuilt their observatories to match the new positions. Can you imagine having that kind of observational persistence? To notice that a star is now rising a few degrees off from where it did a century ago, and then say, time to redesign the temple. One fringe but fascinating theory suggests that the Maya tracked precession, that slow wobble of Earth's axis, long before Western astronomers put a name to it. Some researchers believe temple alignments were deliberately updated to reflect these long-term shifts. Historians still argue the point, but the alignments don't lie. You pause beside a temple base with multiple layers visible like a cosmic cake slice. Each layer represents a different building phase, a different generation responding to the sky in its own way. Some layers are slightly rotated, others are shifted forward or back, chasing light like sunflowers made of stone. The architects weren't just practical. They were symbolic. One inscription speaks of raising the mountain that touches the sky, a poetic way of describing temple construction. Yes, but also a literal effort. Bring the observer closer to the stars. You pass a fallen lintel, once spanning a doorway. Carved into its surface is a date, not the date of the building's completion, but the date of a celestial event. That's what mattered. The building wasn't just a space. It was a marker of a moment, frozen in stone. Another wall shows signs of intentional shadow play, a niche placed just deep enough that, for 3 days each year, a beam of light would fall directly onto a painted glyph. That glyph, a god associated with time, or maize, or the moon. Pick your layer of meaning. The builders knew them all. It's tempting to think of this work as reverent or even mystical. And yes, there was ceremony. But it was also logistics. Someone had to quarry the stones. Someone had to calculate angles. Someone had to say, if we start laying bricks today, we'll have the east wall up before the equinox. Imagine being a stonemason with a cosmic deadline. You find a small marking on the ground, a sunburst etched into stone. It may have been part of a larger alignment grid, or maybe just a point from which to measure shadows. The Maya likely used simple gnomons, sticks in the ground, to track solar motion, measuring the lengths of shadows at noon. Combine enough of those observations, and you get seasonal drift. Repeat that over years, you get precision architecture. Historians still marvel at the accuracy of these techniques. And with no iron tools, no wheels, no cranes, and certainly no laser levels, just ropes, water levels, plumb bobs, and absolute patience, like building a cathedral with a protractor made of twigs and stubborn hope. You sit now at the base of a low wall. A cool breeze brushes past, carrying the scent of stone and soil. You close your eyes and imagine the start of construction a day chosen. Because Venus rose at just the right moment, because the moon was waxing, because the sun landed exactly on the outer corner of an ancestor's tomb. And then the first stone is laid, and it matters, because here, nothing is built without the sky's permission. Next, we'll watch how celestial events like eclipses, alignments, and Venus risings weren't just tracked. They were used to launch wars, crown kings, and spark massive festivals across the Mayan world. The stars are deeper now, the kind of velvety black sky that makes you feel like you could fall upward into it if you looked too long. And somewhere, just over the horizon, the planet Venus is getting ready to rise again. You shift in place, now perched beside the base of a crumbled temple. And you can feel it, that low buzz, that sense of cosmic expectation. Because in the Mayan world, celestial events weren't just moments to mark, they were triggers. The sky didn't whisper. It gave orders. And when the signs aligned, the Maya launched wars, crowned kings, and danced in massive festivals, all because of something that happened in the heavens. You stare at a stela standing awkwardly in the center of the plaza, half swallowed by weeds. On its surface, barely visible in the moonlight, are glyphs that translate to a date, a ruler's name, and a star, a specific one, probably Venus, because according to the Dresden Codex and countless other stelae, the Maya timed warfare based on Venus's appearances, especially its re-emergence as the morning star. Historians still argue whether this connection was symbolic or literal. Did kings really wait for Venus to rise before sending troops? Or was it a way to justify battles already in the works? Either way, the records are clear. Venus appears. War breaks out. You wander past the remnants of a long ball court. This, too, was connected to the heavens. The famous Mesoamerican ballgame part sport, part ritual, was often played on days tied to celestial cycles. The game's symbolism ran deep. Two teams reenacting cosmic battles. Sun versus moon. Light versus dark. Order versus chaos. It wasn't just about winning. It was about aligning earthly actions with celestial movements. One lesser-known fact: some stelae record multiple eclipses alongside military victories and royal successions. These weren't coincidences. An eclipse was a big deal, sometimes feared, sometimes revered, always powerful. If you timed your coronation to an eclipse, you weren't just showing off. You were saying, I rule with the sky's permission. You find a half-collapsed stairway nearby, and imagine the scene: banners flapping, drums pounding, incense thick in the air. At the top of the temple, a ruler in jade and feathers raises his arms to the rising sun. or maybe to Venus below. Crowds gather not just for spectacle, but because this moment had been calculated centuries in advance. The sky said it was time, and so the city obeyed. There's something strangely modern about it, like launching a rocket timed to the second, only instead of technology, it's belief, myth, and math braided into ceremony. The Maya didn't improvise. They orchestrated. You pass another platform, this one with carvings of dancers' arms extended, feet mid-step, celebration. But not spontaneous. These dances were often timed with calendar rounds, Hob festivals, or Venus events. Entire cities would shut down for multi-day festivals, tied to astronomical alignments that were predicted generations in advance. And these weren't just backyard barbecues. We're talking massive civic operations, food offerings, music, plays, sacrifices, even firework-like displays using burning resins and torches. Some historians believe these events were staged to coincide with key astronomical shifts, giving them a double-purpose ritual and reassurance. Because here's the thing, when the sky changes, people get nervous. A sudden eclipse, a comet, a planet that disappears and then comes back brighter than before. The Maya knew this, so the festivals weren't just about joy. They were about control, about reminding people that someone was watching the sky, someone understood it, and someone had a plan. You pause in front of a glyph that shows a star with jagged lines around it, likely a reference to a supernova or meteor. Some researchers believe the Maya may have recorded rare events like these, and folded them into their calendars, not always accurately, but symbolically. After all, if the stars misbehaved, the least you can do is throw a festival and hope they're appeased. One curious example is the so-called Star War glyph, a combination of a star symbol and what appears to be a fiery blast. These glyphs show up next to dates of military campaigns. Some scholars think they're purely metaphorical. Others argue they represent literal celestial omens used to justify conflict. Either way, the pattern's there. Sky changes. Rulers act. You walk now toward the edge of the city, where smaller platforms dot the landscape. Not royal temples, community altars. Perhaps, here, local priests might have held simpler ceremonies. Offerings of food, quiet chants, burned copal to carry prayers into the cosmos, because the relationship with the sky wasn't limited to kings. Everyone looked up. Even commoners may have known the basics when Venus would rise, when an eclipse might come, when it was time to plant or harvest based on the tzolkin. The priests had the math, but the people had the rhythm. It was built into their lives. You sit on one of the smaller altars now, cooled by the stone. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when the jungle's listening, too. And above you, the stars still churn through their ancient loops. You realize this isn't about believing the sky controls us. It's about accepting that we're part of its story. And the Maya knew that story well. They watched, they waited, and when the time came, they acted in harmony with the heavens. Next, we'll look at how they managed to juggle multiple overlapping calendars, one sacred, one solar, and others even weirder, and somehow kept everything running without a single sticky note. You stretch out your legs now on a wide stone ledge, deep in the heart of an old plaza. The night air is dense and still, thick with the scent of warm limestone and moss. Somewhere off in the distance, a nightbird whistles once, and then the world goes quiet again. You stare up at the stars, but this time your thoughts aren't just on the lights above. They're on the ticking below. Because the Maya didn't have just one calendar, or even two. They ran an entire suite of calendars, overlapping like gears in some cosmic wristwatch. Each one ticking to a different rhythm. Each one sacred. And somehow, no one went mad keeping track of it all. You sit now beside a carved stone wheel, the real kind. Not metaphorical. And imagine what it must have been like to live your life according to several different kinds of time. There was the Hob, the 365-day solar calendar. That one's easy enough to grasp. It had 18 months of 20 days each, plus a strange little 5-day period called Wyeb at the end of the year, and that little week, supposedly full of bad vibes. People stayed indoors, skipped travel, and tried not to make major life decisions. You know, like Mercury retrograde, but with real consequences. Then there's the Tzolk'in, the sacred 260-day calendar, a mystical cycle used for naming, rituals, and prophecy. It didn't match up with the solar year, but it didn't need to. It was like a spiritual heartbeat, ticking in its own loop, with 20-day names and 13 numbers cycling together in combinations. So today might be Fafke'an, and tomorrow 6th Chikchan. It's both simple and maddening, like Sudoku for the gods. And finally, there's the calendar round, which combined both the Hab and Tzolk'in to create a 52-year cycle. A full turn of this loop meant no combination of dates repeated for half a century. That's how they avoided confusion. If your birthday was 8 Lamat 9 Pop, that combo wouldn't pop up again for 52 years. Basically, you got your own personal cosmic fingerprint, and if you lived long enough to see your birth date come around again, congratulations, you'd just completed one full round of sacred time. Historians still argue about whether the average Mayan farmer or craftsman tracked all of these calendars, or whether that was strictly the job of priests and scribes. Some believe the calendar knowledge was widely shared in basic form, after all. Planting and harvesting had to follow the seasons. Others argue that the deeper layers, the sacred cycles and festival alignments, were kept in the hands of the elite. Either way, the result was a society structured around rhythm, not randomness. You notice a series of glyphs etched into the stone wall beside you. They don't just record names, they record dates, specific ones. And not just when something happened, but how it sat in cosmic context. A royal wedding wasn't just held on a nice spring day. It happened on 4 Ajah 8 Sek, a date selected for its celestial flavor. If that date fell under the guidance of a Venus rising, even better. It added weight, legitimacy, fate. One quirky detail: the Maya even scheduled construction projects based on calendar cycles. There's evidence of buildings being started or halted, depending on whether the day was hot, dark, fertile, or decaying. These weren't just poetic terms. They were part of a belief system where time had character. Time could be generous, stubborn, violent, or nurturing. And choosing the wrong day to start a temple, that could curse it from the first brick. You step into the shade of a roofless corridor and pause beside a carving of a long serpent, its body marked with glyphs and bar dot numbers. This could be a long count date, the big one. The one that tracked time from the start of the current world, way back in 3114 BCE. These inscriptions are mind-bending. They don't just say this happened on a Tuesday. They say this event occurred exactly 345, 678 days since the beginning of time. Not even Google Calendar can do that. And these weren't estimates. The numbers are consistent, logical, and deeply connected to astronomy. The priests didn't just know the dates. They knew the stars associated with them, the ruling gods, the historical echoes. To them, time wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral, coiling back on itself, bringing old energies into new moments. One lesser-known tidbit: some rulers backdated important events to earlier cosmic alignments. That's right, they rewrote history, not for politics, well, not only for politics, but to match the stars' blessing. If your coronation date wasn't ideal, you could claim the ceremony had started on a more favorable day weeks earlier. Who's going to fact-check you? You're the one with the math scrolls. You rest again, thinking about how exhausting it would be to juggle all these calendars. And yet, somehow, it worked. Entire cities functioned like clockwork festivals, with people showing up at the right plaza at the right time, carrying the right offerings. How? Probably because priests announced key dates, or painted them on murals, or shouted them from temple steps. The message was clear. Don't mess with time. Time has teeth. You look up at the sky again, where constellations have shifted ever so slightly. Somewhere out there, Venus is preparing to vanish behind the sun, starting its next phase. Down here, the Maya already knew that would happen. Their calendars didn't just track the past, they anticipated the future, guiding people in planting, politics, marriage, or even names. That's right, your birthday combination could determine your name, your personality, your fate, like a zodiac sign, but with mathematical precision and more feathers. So next time you think you've got a lot on your calendar, remember this. The Maya juggled at least 3 major cycles, 1 solar, 1 sacred, 1 cosmically long, and they did it with no metal tools, no paper as we know it, and no margin for error. Time wasn't a background detail, it was everything. Next, we'll turn our eyes skyward again to witness the fire ceremonies, eclipses, and blazing sky omens that added spectacle and sometimes panic to this already complex celestial dance. The night has grown darker now, more complete, the kind of night where shadows sharpen, and even the trees seem to lean in, listening. You feel a shift in the air, a stillness that hangs low to the ground, like the jungle itself is holding its breath. And then, without warning, you hear it crack. Hiss! The unmistakable sound of fire catching. Somewhere nearby, a torch has just been lit. Not for warmth, not for light, but for ceremony, because tonight, the Maya are talking to the sky, and they're using flames, smoke, and celestial drama to do it. You shuffle toward the sound, stepping carefully between uneven stones, and catch the flicker of orange light ahead. A fire ceremony is underway, just like it would have been 1,000 years ago. The blaze isn't random. It's timed to a cosmic event, possibly an eclipse, a solstice, or the reappearance of a planet like Venus. Whatever the reason, the flames aren't there to look pretty. They're messages, offerings, a kind of celestial text message written in sparks. You arrive at a low stone platform. The fire is ringed by figures in silhouette priests, maybe, or villagers. Incense curls upward in thick plumes, joining the firelight in reaching for the stars. You breathe it in. It smells like resin, like ancient bark, like history burned slowly and intentionally. The Maya believed fire was a bridge, a way to carry offerings skyward, where gods and celestial forces could receive them. And on certain days, particularly charged ones in the calendar, fire rituals were essential. They might burn food, feathers, even carved effigies. And always copal resin sweet, sticky, smoky, and sacred. You glance up. The sky is still clear. But you know, tonight's not about calm. It's about watching for signs, because the Maya also understood something unsettling. Sometimes, the sky misbehaves, like during eclipses. To you, an eclipse might feel like a fun science field trip. To the Maya, it was often a cosmic emergency, the moon or sun being devoured. That wasn't a teachable moment. That was a signal, a disruption, something deeply out of sync. Historians still debate exactly how the Maya interpreted eclipses. Some records suggest they believed in celestial beasts attacking the sun or moon. Others speak of eclipses as doorways between worlds, moments when gods could cross over or be wounded. Either way, they were rare, dramatic, and deeply feared. And the most astonishing part, they predicted them. That's right. The Dresden Codex contains eclipse tables, mathematical records, that allowed Mayan priests to anticipate lunar and solar eclipses, using nothing more than sky watching, Bardot math, and sheer determination. They figured out the Saros cycle, the period after which eclipses repeat. Maybe not with total accuracy, but enough to sound the alarm. Imagine being a high priest, and noticing that tomorrow is one of those days. The sky may darken. People may panic. So what do? You prepare. You light the fires early. You gather the people. You perform the rituals. Because if the gods are about to blink, you'd better make sure they're happy when they open their eyes again. You step back from the fire and notice something else. A set of carved stones arranged in a semicircle. Their surfaces are blackened with soot. These were reused fire altars, passed down through generations. Some might have been lit during previous eclipses, creating a kind of burned calendar, each scorch mark a record of a sky event and the human response to it. You sit on one of the stones, warm from the fire, and think about how the Maya viewed these events. They didn't separate sky and earth. Disappeared. Something on earth would reflect it. Crops might fail. Kings might die. Or a war might be lost or won. And then there were the really unpredictable events. Comets, meteors, sudden flares of light. These were considered dangerous omens. The appearance of a smoking star could signal plague, famine, or political upheaval. One codex shows a star falling to Earth while figures flee in panic. It's dramatic. It's apocalyptic. It's also just a shooting star, but with enormous narrative impact. Historians still argue about whether the Maya recorded specific supernovae. There are hints in the glyphs, stars with flame-like accents, dated in eerie proximity to celestial explosions observed in other parts of the world, but nothing conclusive. Still, it's not hard to imagine that a flash in the sky, followed by months of a new, unblinking star, that would have rocked the world. You glance at a mural near the edge of the temple wall. It shows a figure, maybe a god, maybe a king reaching upward toward a blazing sky. Above him are spirals, stars, flames. It's not a peaceful night. It's a cosmic confrontation. This is what fire ceremonies were about, facing the heavens, accepting their unpredictability, and trying, even in a small way, to influence them. But not all fire was about fear. Some ceremonies celebrated renewal, like during the end of a calendar round every 52 years, when the fear of apocalypse loomed. The Maya believed the gods might decide not to renew the world, and so they staged massive new fire ceremonies. All fires in a city would be extinguished. The world would go dark, and then, from the center, a new fire would be lit, rebirth through flame. You close your eyes now, the scent of copal thick in the air, and imagine the quiet of a city in total darkness. Every household waiting, no fires allowed, just darkness. And then, from the ceremonial center, a single flame, then another, then another. The city breathes again. The stars continue to turn. The world didn't end. Not this time. You inhale deeply. The fire crackles beside you. Overhead, the stars twinkle on, undisturbed. But you now know they're being watched carefully. Their every twitch and blink folded into calendars, prophecies, and ceremonies lit by flame and guided by ancient faith. Next, we'll turn to the long count calendar, that massive cosmic clock ticking forward from the beginning of time itself. Stone by stone, date by date, toward a future the Maya never quite finished carving. You're leaning now against the side of a wide stone staircase. Its steps half cracked, but still holding firm. The moonlight glints off the edges of the glyphs carved deep into the wall beside you. Long columns of numbers and curling symbols that look more like art than arithmetic. But what you're staring at isn't just history carved in stone. It's a clock, a massive, unblinking, cosmic clock. This is the long count, the Mayan calendar that doesn't measure weeks or months, but epochs. You brush your fingers lightly across the surface. Each number here represents days, not hours, not minutes, just the slow, steady beat of time, marching forward from the moment long ago, a moment the Maya called the beginning of the current world, a date they pinned with stunning specificity, August 11th, 3114 BCE. Historians still debate the exact correlation to our calendar. There's wiggle room based on different interpretations, but most agree that's the ballpark. According to the Maya, this is when the gods completed their work, when time started ticking, when this cycle of existence began, not the first world, not the only world, just the latest one. The long count measures time in a unique way. You already know the Maya loved base 20 math. Well, here it gets even more layered. The calendar counts days in units like Kines 1 day, Winals 20 days, Tuns 360 days, Katun 7, 200 days, and Baktuns 4,000 days. Stack a few Baktuns together and you're counting millennia. Like most people count weekends, you pause beside a larger glyph at the base of the column. It marks the start of a Baktun, a 394-year period. These were the Maya's cosmic chapters. Each Baktun told a different part of the story, a different mood of the world. Wars, golden ages, collapses. The calendar didn't just record time. It gave time personality. One lesser-known tidbit. The long count could move both forward and backward. You'd think a civilization focused on future prophecies would avoid looking back. But nope. The Maya were just as fascinated with deep past as they were with the far future. Some inscriptions even note events that took place thousands of years before 3114 BCE. Like mythological birthdays of gods, or cosmic battles fought when the world was still just an idea. You take a seat now on a low ledge, looking up at a carved ceiling that's barely holding together. You imagine a priest or scribe sitting where you are now, copying these dates by flickering torchlight, one careful brush stroke at a time. This wasn't just record-keeping. It was belief baked into every number. To write down a date was to confirm its truth, its place in the great loop. And yes, loop is the right word. Time, to the Maya, wasn't a line. It was a spiral, a pattern, a song that looped back on itself every so often, with refrains and echoes, if something happened on 8. Jaw 13. Pop during one Baktun, and that date came around again a few thousand years later. The energies might return, the consequences might ripple. You stand now before one of the most famous long count inscriptions. And even if you can't read a single glyph, the weight of it presses in. Each number is carved with care, like a sacred tattoo. The date it marks, the end of the 13th Baktun, which, after a lot of scholarly math, lined up with, December 21st, 2012. Ah, yes, that date. Remember the panic, the countdowns, the end of the world movies, and Crystal Skull merch. All because this long count inscription reached what looked like a finish line. But to the Maya, it wasn't the end. It was just the reset of the counter, like flipping from December 31st to January 1st, only with a bit more jade jewelry and bloodletting. Historians still argue whether the Maya viewed the 13th Baktun's end as a moment of doom, transition, or just mathematical neatness. Some codices hint at renewal ceremonies, others suggest ritual caution, and still others treat it as no more significant than finishing a calendar round and buying a new one from your favorite glyph vendor. But what's certain is that the Maya built this system to last. In theory, the long count could track billions of days into the future. Some inscriptions list dates so far ahead they make our computers blush. One monument goes into the 20th Baktun, a date we won't hit until the 4000s. Because why not? If you're going to build a calendar, might as well future-proof it. You look around now and notice something incredible. The long count isn't just etched in stone. It's everywhere. On staircases, on monuments, on jade jewelry. Time was not a background feature. It was front and center in Mayan life. A king didn't just rule during his lifetime. He ruled on specific dates, within specific cosmic contexts, all tied back to the great ticking of the long count. And those dates, they weren't just labels. They had flavor, meaning if you were born on a 3-kat-6 kumku, that wasn't just trivia. It was a spiritual diagnosis. It shaped your destiny, your name, maybe even your jobs. Marriages were arranged, wars launched, cities founded, all according to what the calendar suggested. And now you're sitting here, centuries later, staring at those same carved glyphs, marveling at how something so ancient could feel so familiar. A big calendar, a countdown, a reset. Only the scale is different. You smile. The Maya didn't just map the sky. They mapped our place in time, then wrapped it in numbers, symbols, and just enough mystery to keep us staring upward long after their cities crumbled. Next, we'll return to the temples themselves and explore how even their shadows were built to dance, marking time through the play of light and darkness on stone. You rise from the edge of that old staircase, brushing the dust from your palms, and start a slow walk toward one of the more curious features of Mayan architecture. Not the towering steps or dizzying roof combs, but the shadows. Yes, shadows. Not the metaphorical kind. Not omens or ancient ghosts real. Tangible shadows cast by the sun across carved stone. Because the Maya didn't just build temples to sit still. They built them to move with light, to come alive on the right day, at the right hour, when the sun hit just right. You stop in front of a stepped pyramid, not the biggest or most ornate, but one with an uncanny presence. On its stairway, the stone flares outward in angles that seem intentional, and they are, because twice a year, on the spring and autumn equinoxes, this pyramid doesn't just sit there, it performs. As the sun begins to set, shadows cast by the steps align to create the illusion of a massive serpent slithering down the side of the building. You've probably seen the photos from Chichen Itza, but to stand here, imagining it in real time, is something else entirely. The effect is created by a play of light and angles, a combination of stairway balustrade and carefully aligned cornerstones. And the kicker, at the base of the pyramid sits a carved serpent's head, open-mouthed and waiting. As the sun sets, the shadow snake connects to that stone head, creating a complete divine creature of shadow and stone. Chills, right? Historians still debate whether this phenomenon was a happy accident or a deliberate feature. Most agree, too many alignments, too much precision, too many matching events across cities for it to be coincidence. This wasn't a fluke. This was light choreography designed by stonemasons with the patience of saints and the observational powers of hawks. You stroll around the pyramid's base, imagining the crowds that once gathered here. Not just tourists with cameras, but villagers, priests, dancers, and sky watchers, people who believed that when the shadow serpent descended, it wasn't just pretty, it was the return of a god. Specifically, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity. His arrival signaled balance, renewal, and change. The equinox didn't just mark a turn in the calendar, it marked a cosmic check-in. But the Maya didn't limit shadow magic to just one structure. All over Mesoamerica, you'll find temples, plazas, and even humble homes arranged to play with light. In Huaxactun, a grouping of 3 buildings forms a basic solar observatory. On the solstices and equinoxes, the sun rises perfectly over one of the 3. It's like a massive stone clock that ticks once every few months and has no moving parts. You step into the partial shade of a corridor, where a narrow slit opens to the sky. This zenith tube, as some call it, would allow sunlight to fall directly onto a ceremonial spot for only a few minutes each year. Typically on the days when the sun passes directly overhead, casting no shadows at all. In the tropics, this happens twice a year, and the Maya noticed. Oh, did they notice? One lesser-known tidbit. These shadowless days were so important that some cities held special festivals, and some inscriptions even suggest that temples were started or inaugurated during these zero-shadow moments. The logic was simple. What better day to begin a new era than when the sun sits exactly above you, unchallenged and full? You crouch near a small altar, now cracked and half covered with moss. On its surface are etched concentric circles, likely used for shadow tracking. A stick in the center, a gnomon, would cast a moving shadow across the rings. Over the course of a year, priests could measure the length and direction of that shadow at noon, recording changes and predicting seasonal shifts. This wasn't just science for science's sake. Shadow reading helped with agriculture, determining planting and harvesting times. It guided ritual scheduling, ensured temples were used at the right moment, and even helped in naming ceremonies, since certain days had celestial properties assigned to them. And this shadow logic went both ways. Some temples were designed not just to receive light, but to cast it. Long walls would channel sunlight down dark corridors, suddenly illuminating a statue or glyph. Picture it, a shadowy chamber, cool and quiet, and then a beam of sun cuts through, landing directly on the eyes of a carved deity. No electricity, no spotlight, just the sun showing up on cue like a trained actor. Historians still argue about the extent of this architectural astronomy. Was it just for major temples? Or was this level of precision applied even in smaller ceremonial structures? The consensus seems to be, if the structure was meant to speak to the gods, it was also built to listen to the sky. You stand now where two buildings once faced each other across a plaza. Their doorways align in such a way that on one specific day each year, the rising sun shines straight through both, hitting a ceremonial marker at the far end. The effect would last only a few minutes. Miss it, and you'd have to wait another 365 days. Talk about a tight deadline. And these light alignments weren't limited to the sun. In some places, sight lines were designed for moonlight, or even the glimmer of Venus when it rose before dawn. There are records of ceremonial torch processions timed to begin when a specific star appeared above a temple's edge. The Maya didn't just watch the sky passively. They scheduled themselves around it. You sit back against the pyramid now, the stone cool against your spine, and try to imagine what it must have felt like to live in a world where the buildings themselves could tell you what day it was, where a shadow crawling down a staircase meant more than just the time of day. It meant the gods were watching, nodding, perhaps even smiling. In our world of clocks and calendars and glowing phone screens, it's easy to forget that time can be felt, not just counted. The Maya felt it. They built with it, and their shadows still move. Next, we'll explore how the Maya interpreted strange sky events, comets, exploding stars, or unseasonal alignments, and how these celestial curveballs fed their greatest myths and their deepest fears. You're still tucked at the base of the pyramid, shadows now long and stretched, but your eyes turn upward again. It's late, really late, the kind of still hour when most animals have gone quiet, and even the breeze seems too tired to stir. The stars glitter above like a sea of secrets, calm and familiar. Until something moves, a streak of white across the sky, brief, burning, gone in seconds, a meteor, a falling star. Or, if you were a Maya sky watcher, a warning. Tonight, we're diving into the strange events, those rare, unpredictable visitors in the night sky that didn't follow cycles or respect calendars. These weren't the elegant risings of Venus, or the measured steps of the moon. No, these were celestial curveballs, comets, meteors, and the occasional nova that shook up the orderly rhythm of Mayan astronomy and fed their wildest myths and fears. You stand now beside a carved stela, weathered and half lost to time. Its glyphs are unclear, but some scholars believe they depict a smoking star, possibly the Mayan way of recording a comet. To us, a comet might feel majestic, poetic, but to the Maya, it could be a terrible omen. Something arriving unannounced in a sky that was supposed to run on a strict divine schedule. And that's what made these events so terrifying. The Maya were masters of prediction. Their world was built on the idea that time was knowable, trackable, beautifully cyclical. So when a blazing object tore across the night sky with no warning, it wasn't just scary. It was unnatural. Something had gone wrong in the heavens. Historians still debate which specific comets the Maya may have recorded. Some think glyphs in the Dresden Codex or on various stelae in Copan and Yaxchilan describe visible comets from around the 8th and 9th centuries CE. The problem, Maya glyphs weren't designed for astronomical footnotes. They blended fact, metaphor, and myth so tightly that a star might be a god, a ruler, or a ball of flaming rock, depending on who was interpreting. You crouch beside a stone bench at the edge of a ceremonial court, and imagine the panic that might ripple through a city when a comet appeared. Priests scrambling through codices, double-checking dates, hoping they'd just missed something. Was this event prophesied and overlooked? Or was it something new, something outside the script? That fear, that tension, often gave rise to stories. One fringe theory suggests that the Maya interpreted some celestial events as battles between sky gods, cosmic duels too powerful to be predicted. A streaking star could be a fallen deity, cast out from the heavens for defiance. A sudden flash might be a god's weapon, thrown across the sky during some great, invisible war. You find a mural, faded but still legible in moonlight, showing a god with a torch and a serpent wrapped around his shoulders. Some believe this image depicts a fire star, possibly a meteor, or nova, being carried by a divine messenger. These events were often linked to major world changes, droughts, floods, disease, or the fall of rulers. The sky was speaking. The message wasn't always clear, but the urgency was. One lesser-known tidbit. Some Mayan temples appear to have been constructed or modified after such sky events. Was it a response? A way to appease angry gods? Or simply to realign with the new cosmic normal? It's hard to say, but the pattern is there. A star blazes unexpectedly, and shortly afterward, architecture shifts, rituals intensify, new inscriptions appear. You wander now to a higher platform, offering a clearer view of the sky. You try to imagine what a supernova would have looked like to them, a new star, brighter than anything else, suddenly appearing in the night. No one expected it. No one had marked its arrival in the codices. And yet, there it is, unmoving and brilliant. For days, for weeks, we now know of historical supernovae visible to the naked eye. The one in 1054 CE that created the Crab Nebula. For example, Chinese astronomers recorded it. But what about the Maya? Some researchers argue that certain glyphs, those showing sudden bursts of light or symbols of newness in the heavens, could reference such events. Historians still argue about the evidence. It's tantalizing, inconclusive, just like the sky itself. You think again of meteors, those brief, darting lights, and how the Maya might have tied them to souls. Some traditions suggest that a falling star was a soul being released, or a soul failing to reach the celestial plane. Others believed it was a warning from ancestors, or worse, a signal of death to come. And unlike planets or the moon, meteors could be fast, quiet, and solitary. That randomness meant they were harder to wrap into the calendar. So instead, they were wrapped into myth. The gods were angry, A portal had opened. Something was breaking through. You sit now with your back against a broken wall, listening to the silence. You imagine a priest 1,000 years ago doing the same thing, watching the sky, waiting for something unexpected. When a comet appeared, maybe he whispered a prayer. When a meteor flashed, maybe he closed his eyes and offered thanks or apologies. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. The sky was trying to say something, and it was the priest's job to listen. The Maya believed the heavens were a dialogue, sometimes orderly, sometimes chaotic, but always active, always full of signs. And while most of those signs were predictable, mapped, named, tied to sacred numbers, some weren't. Some were wild cards. And when they showed up, the people responded not with passivity, but with story. Because that's what humans do, especially brilliant ones like the Maya. When the sky defies explanation, we mythologize the anomaly. We build gods into it. We draw meaning out of it, and then we carve it into stone. So we never forget the night the sky broke its own rules. Next, we'll step away from the stars just long enough to wander the ceremonial ball courts, where ritual games mirrored the celestial balance of light and dark. And every bounce of the ball echoed a cosmic duel. The night presses close, now warm, deep, and humming with hidden life. But the stars still gleam above you, unblinking and timeless. You rise from the platform and begin a slow walk down a path lined with low walls and broken stones, until the trees open to reveal something unexpected. A ball court, long, rectangular, and slightly sunken. The court seems oddly out of place. Not a temple, not a plaza, but still clearly sacred. This wasn't a space for idle recreation. You step down into its center, the worn surface beneath your feet smoother than the jungle floor, as if it's still waiting for the next game, and maybe it is. Because for the Maya, the Mesoamerican ball game wasn't just sport. It was cosmic theater. The court is flanked by two long sloping walls. Near the center, high on each side, you spot stone rings small, elevated goals through which players might have tried to pass a rubber ball, not with their hands. Mind you, no, that would have been far too easy. The Maya used hips, shoulders, and thighs. No cheat codes, just training, stamina, and bruises in deeply inconvenient places. But this wasn't just a show of athletic skill. The ball game symbolized the eternal struggle between light and dark, life and death, the celestial order, and the underworld's chaos. Think of it as the sacred halftime show to the dance of the cosmos, and on the right days, ones chosen carefully by priests, based on the calendar and sky events, it became a ritual performance. Historians still debate the exact rules of the game. Did all cities follow the same format? Were the stakes always high? Evidence suggests variation. Some games were celebratory, others were political, and some were deadly serious, quite literally. There are inscriptions and murals that suggest human sacrifice was tied to certain matches, though whether it was the winners, the losers, or selected players who met this fate is still up for scholarly fistfights. You pause in the center of the court, letting your footsteps echo off the walls. Imagine the scene. Drums pounding, crowds watching from the edges, incense curling through the air. Two teams face off, dressed in elaborate padding, wearing symbolic headdresses, sometimes even masks. And overhead, the sun slowly moves, casting long shadows across the field. Because this wasn't just about the ball. The court itself was designed to mirror the heavens. The axis of the court, often aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of key stars. Some courts had markers that lined up with sunrise or sunset at specific times of year. One fringe theory even suggests certain games may have been timed to Venus's movements, with priests waiting for the planet's appearance before initiating a match. You walk to one end of the court, where a carved panel depicts two players in mid-motion. One is poised to strike the ball, The other appears to be offering something possibly the severed head of a previous opponent, though some say it's metaphorical. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some glyphs associate the bouncing ball with the sun itself, moving across the sky, diving into the underworld, and then rising again. According to the Popol Vuh, the Maya's great mythic narrative, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, descend into the underworld and are forced to play a ball game against the gods of death. It's a trick, a trap. But the twins are clever. They survive trials, outwit the underworld lords, and in the end, rise again, becoming the sun and moon. You step closer to the court wall, now seeing it not as just a playing field, but as a stage for retelling that myth. Every bounce of the ball, every collision of hips and limbs was part of that larger narrative. Daylight wins, darkness bites back. The cycle continues, and it wasn't just symbolic. These games had real consequences. In some cities, victory could mean favor with the gods. In others, the game served as a bloodless alternative to war, a kind of sacred negotiation where fate was decided by skill rather than sword. Some historians believe rival cities sent champions to compete, and the outcome affected political or trade agreements. Talk about high-stakes playoffs. You sit on a low stone bench beside the court, and think about how these events must have pulled entire cities together, not just the elites. Everyone. Vendors would sell food and drink. Families would gather to watch. Children would imitate the players in the dust nearby. And above it all, the priests would watch the sky, making sure the timing aligned with sacred days. And when the game was over, if it fell on a key calendar date, say, the start of a new Tun, or a Venus alignment, it might be followed by ritual offerings, or a fire ceremony, maybe even a shadow display in a nearby temple. The court wasn't just an island. It was part of a larger cosmic circuit, wired directly into the stars. One lesser-known theory suggests that the ball itself, made of dense rubber, and sometimes weighing over 8 pounds, was treated as a sacred object, possibly even consecrated before major games. Some scholars think certain balls were associated with celestial bodies, Sun, Moon, or Venus, and were stored in special places when not in use. Ballrooms for balls, but not the dancing kind. You stand now, dusting off your hands, and walk the length of the court one last time. The space feels charged. Even now, it's not a ruin. It's a pause between matches, a place where myth, sport, and astronomy collided in a bouncing, bruising spectacle watched by stars and mortals alike. The ball game reminds you that for the Maya, the heavens weren't far away. They played out down here, on stone courts, under open skies, with crowds cheering and priests counting shadows. The universe wasn't something distant, it was something you could play in. Next, we'll return to the codices, the bark paper books that held Maya astronomy together, and open the pages of the Dresden Codex, where the stars weren't just watched, but written down with astonishing precision. The ball court fades behind you now, swallowed by the dark and the hush of sleeping stone. You find a path lit faintly by moonlight and begin to follow it, the sound of your own steps soft against the moss-covered ground. There's a breeze, finally cool, with a hint of damp bark, and you can almost hear the crackle of pages turning in your mind. Because tonight, you're heading toward a different kind of temple, one made not of limestone, but of knowledge. Welcome to the world of the codices, specifically the Dresden Codex, the Maya's most astonishing star map on paper. Well, not quite paper. The Maya made their books out of amatl, a type of bark covered in lime to make a creamy writing surface. These long, folded strips were painted with brushes made from squirrel fur and reeds, then tucked away in temple libraries or priestly homes. They weren't meant to be read aloud. They were read inward, like meditative puzzles, complex, sacred, exacting. You arrive at the remains of a scribe's chamber. The roof is long gone, but the walls hold traces of mural red, black, faded blue, You sit on a carved stone bench that may have once supported stacks of codices, now lost. Because here's the tragedy. Out of what was likely hundreds, maybe thousands of Maya books, only 4 survived. 4. The rest were burned, deliberately and systematically during colonial conquests. One friar, in a single confession, admitted to destroying a great number of them, as they contained nothing but superstition and lies. You wince at the loss, but the 4 that remain, they are dense with brilliance. The Dresden Codex is the most complete, the most famous, and the most astronomical. It likely comes from the post-classic period, around the 11th or 12th century, and is now tucked in a museum far from the place it was created. But close your eyes, and you can almost see it being opened here, carefully, on a stone table slick with humidity. You flip through it in your mind. Page after page of glyphs, symbols, numbers, and figure some gods, some planets, all involved in tracking the cosmos. One section contains tables for eclipse prediction, using a 177-day cycle. The Maya plotted out when eclipses were most likely to occur, and they were often right, with no telescopes, no clocks, just observation, calculation, and a reverence for rhythm. Historians still debate how accurate these predictions were across centuries. The tables aren't perfect, but they show a grasp of pattern recognition that rivals early European astronomy. The Maya weren't guessing. They were computing. You stop on a famous page, the Venus table. It tracks the cycle of Venus across 584 days, when it appears as morning star, when it disappears behind the sun, when it returns as evening star. The Codex lays out this dance over 4 complete cycles, 336 days, every phase, every shift. It's astonishing. And here's the thing. Modern astronomers have checked the math. The Venus cycle in the Codex deviates from our modern measurement by only a fraction of a day. That's pre-telescope, pre-Newton, pre-everything precision, carved into bark paper using a brush dipped in black soot and sap. You lean back, staring at the stars, and wonder how many nights some poor priest stayed up just to record one appearance. Did they take turns? Did they argue over calculations? One quirky theory suggests some Codex scribes developed preference glyphs, subtle signature styles, like an artist's flourish, making it possible to identify individual authors within the pages. It's also likely that the scribes weren't just writing what they saw. They were also inheriting data from generations before. These weren't lone geniuses scribbling by torchlight. They were part of a chain of knowledge going back centuries, maybe more. The Codex wasn't just a book. It was the memory of the sky. Another curious section, the rain god charts. These tables track not just celestial events, but their earthly consequences. A Venus rising might be linked to drought. A lunar phase might influence rain patterns. The priests used these combinations to predict agricultural timing, royal health, even when to perform specific ceremonies. They weren't just reading stars, they were interpreting patterns in time. You glance at a nearby carving of a priest, holding what might be a codex. His face focused, his fingers gently lifting a page. This was sacred work, dangerous work. 2. Misreading the sky could mean disaster. Plant too early and you risk famine. Misjudge a festival date and you invite divine displeasure. The codices weren't just books, they were tools of survival. Historians still argue over how widespread codex literacy was. Some believe only elite priests could read them. Others think knowledge may have been more communal, passed along in chants. Oral formulas, or murals that simplified the complex data. Either way, the codex was the core of Maya celestial science, and the Dresden Codex was its crown jewel. You reach for a fragment of pottery nearby, and imagine it once held ink. Not just any ink, red and black. Sacred colors. The red was often cinnabar, made from mercury ore. Beautiful, but toxic. The scribes may have slowly poisoned themselves while painting the sky. That's commitment. That's belief. And the codex didn't only look backward, it looked forward. 2. One page includes a count into the distant future. Thousands of days beyond the current calendar cycle. Not just an ending, but a continuation. The Maya knew time didn't stop. Even if their cities fell, even if their books burned, the stars would still turn. The sky would still write. You sit a while longer, picturing those pages folded accordion style, worn at the edges, but still telling the sky's story in dots, bars, and painted gods. A universe mapped in ink and intuition. And the deeper you dive, the more you realize the Maya weren't just watching the stars. They were building a language to speak with them. Next, we'll travel into the temples of Copan and Palenque, where dynasties carved their power into walls with dates, stars, and dreams of ruling both earth and sky. You leave behind the imagined codices, now those sacred folds of bark paper still fluttering in the corners of your mind, and make your way through the jungle hush toward something much heavier. Stone, monument, dynasty. You step into the shadow of Copan, or maybe Palenque, 2 cities, where the Maya didn't just look up at the stars. They claimed them. These weren't your average village kings sipping cacao on jade thrones. No, these were rulers who saw themselves not only as the voice of their people, but as cosmic conduits. The stars didn't just shine above their cities. They were entangled in them, tracked, carved, even impersonated by men in feathered headdresses and obsidian jewelry. You arrive at a tall stela standing guard at the edge of a temple platform. It's decorated top to bottom in glyphs, numbers, and faces, and not just names and battles. What's carved here? What's always carved in Copan and Palenque is a sequence of dates. Specific, deliberate, cosmic. Take Copan. One of its most famous kings. 18. Rabbit or Waxaclajun. Uba Kawil. If you're feeling confident. Wasn't just known for his style, though. Yes, the man had a flair for ornate headdresses. He was known for how he embedded celestial cycles into his rule. His monuments often begin with long count dates, references to sacred day signs, and subtle nods to Venus, the moon, and solar events. You step into the hieroglyphic stairway, yes, that's its real name, and look up. It's the longest known Mayan text, and it tells the entire dynastic history of Copan in stone. Over 2,000 glyph blocks line the steps. Imagine walking up a staircase while reading a timeline of the stars and your family tree at the same time. That's Copan. Historians still debate whether these astronomical references were intended for broad public understanding or just elite ceremonial use. Was a farmer in Copan aware that 18 Rabbit's accession date aligned with a Venus rising, or did that knowledge stay in priestly hands? Either way, the kings made sure the heavens endorsed their rule and made it permanent in stone. You pause at a frieze, half hidden by vines, showing a ruler seated on a jaguar throne with a celestial band over his head. This band, full of star glyphs, marked him as one chosen by the sky. And that wasn't just bragging, it was branding. If the king aligned himself with a star, then any rebellion was rebellion against the cosmos itself. Across the mountains in Palenque, another kind of legacy awaited. Here, under the soft canopy of towering ceiba trees, lies the tomb of Kinich Janaab Pakal, one of the most celebrated Mayan kings. You walk into the temple of the inscriptions and feel it immediately cool, still, and dense with meaning. This isn't just a grave, it's a stellar vault. Pakal's temple was aligned not just architecturally, but cosmologically. His burial was timed to match the long count. His inscriptions speak of past world cycles, gods walking the earth, and the beginning of time itself. and on his sarcophagus lid, a depiction of Pakal descending into the underworld, framed by celestial symbols. Some say it's a star map, others say it's a myth in motion. One quirky detail: the temples of Palenque feature roof combs, ornamental structures that extend high into the sky. Some scholars believe they were designed to amplify the king's presence in ritual, or even to mark celestial events, serving as directional markers for stargazing. You lie back now in the grass of Palenque's plaza, the stars overhead bright through the open canopy. Imagine the ceremonies, hear incense rising, chants echoing, and rulers stepping into carefully measured positions, timed to stars and shadows. This wasn't theater. This was cosmic choreography. And here's something wild. Many of these cities recorded not only the dates of their founding and rulers' births, but also the alignments of stars at those times. The Maya weren't content to say, Pakal was born. They said, Pakal was born on 8 Ajah 13, Pop, during the third Venus cycle of the current Baktun, beneath a waxing moon and just before the solstice. Which, honestly, makes a birth certificate look a little lazy. Historians still argue about how to read some of these inscriptions. Are all the celestial references literal, or are some metaphorical myths etched in historical clothing? Maybe both. The Maya didn't draw a hard line between science and story. If a star moved on the day you claimed the throne, that was part of your legend. Not coincidence, consequence. You pass another tablet, this one featuring a double-headed serpent spewing stars. It wraps around a ruler like a sash. This isn't just decoration. It's a statement. The ruler didn't just serve the gods. He was surrounded by the cosmos, cloaked in the symbols of sky and time. And these carvings weren't casual. They required astronomers, scribes, and masons working together before a date was carved into stone. It had to be calculated, verified, and deemed ritually appropriate. These monuments are like ancient press releases, but vetted by both priests and planets. You think back to 18 Rabbit, to Pakal, to the lesser-known kings who tried to write their stories into the heavens. Some succeeded, some didn't. Copan fell. Palenque was swallowed by jungle. But the stars they aligned themselves with, still there, still rising, still remembering. You close your eyes now and picture it all. A king steps onto a platform, arms outstretched. The sun hits the temple at just the right angle, and a priest announces the date, not just in human terms, but in celestial ones, and the people cheer. Because for a moment, their city isn't just part of the world, it's part of the sky's own story. Next, we'll dive into how Mayan agricultural life was guided, sometimes dictated by these same celestial patterns. From the planting of maize to the calling of rain, you leave behind the towering temples, now those great stone diaries of kings and cosmos, and head down toward the lowlands. The terrain softens, the air thickens, the jungle closes in with a warm, damp hug. You're not walking through royal plazas anymore. You're walking through fields. And these fields aren't just dirt and plants. They're calendars, too. Because here, the Maya didn't just watch the stars for sport or power. They used them to grow lunch. You're standing now in what was once a milpa, a traditional Maya plot of land where maize, beans, squash, and other crops grew in careful balance. You can still make out the ridged rows, the faint pattern of cultivation under layers of grass and leaf litter, and overhead, the stars that told farmers exactly when to plant, tend, and harvest. You bend down and scoop a handful of soil, rich and dark. This was sacred stuff, not just because it fed families, but because it was directly connected to the gods. The maize god wasn't just a mythic figure. He was the figure, reborn each year when the seeds went into the ground, grown by the sun, cut down at harvest, and reborn again. A cycle, yes, but not just of farming of life itself. The Maya planted, according to the Hab calendar, the 365-day solar cycle, but also consulted the Tzolk'in to select the most spiritually appropriate days. You didn't just toss seeds in the ground when the weather felt nice. You waited for a named day, one with the right tone, energy, and association. If Venus was visible at dawn, and it was a fertile day in the calendar, the planting could begin. Historians still argue how tightly rural farmers followed these cycles. Some believe calendar knowledge was mostly kept by priests. Others argue that everyday Maya, especially in smaller communities, lived by the rhythm of sky and soil, whether or not they could read glyphs. After all, when your entire food supply depends on timing, you pay attention to the heavens. One lesser-known detail. The Maya used animal behavior as a kind of backup alarm clock. If the stars said the rains were coming and so did the frogs, well, you got your seeds ready. If the stars said soon, but the birds weren't nesting yet, maybe you waited another few days. Nature confirmed the sky, and the sky confirmed the schedule. It was all interwoven. You reach a low stone altar near the edge of a clearing. On it, offerings would have been left cornmeal, cacao, feathers, even the occasional chicken, depending on the era. These weren't just in-case sacrifices. They were part of asking permission. Before planting began, farmers might offer thanks to the gods for the last harvest, or plead for rain, or ask forgiveness for last season's late planting. You didn't just grow maize. You negotiated with it. And the rain, that was the wild card. Essential, unpredictable, sacred. The Maya knew its patterns well, but still looked to celestial signs to forecast its coming. One of the most crucial indicators, the Pleiades constellation. Its pre-dawn rising was thought to signal the beginning of the rainy season. You can almost imagine a farmer, half awake before dawn, squinting at the horizon. The moment those 7 faint stars appeared, it was time to act. You smile now, thinking about how we check our weather apps for tomorrow's forecast. And they checked Venus and the Pleiades for the next 4 months. And the accuracy, well, given the survival of their cities in places where farming should have been nearly impossible, they clearly knew what they were doing. Walk a little farther, and you come across a system of raised fields, a kind of swamp-friendly agriculture designed to stay above floodwaters. The layout mimics constellations in some places, though that could be coincidence. Or not. The Maya didn't separate the sacred and the practical. If you could align your field to match a star grouping and still grow squash, why wouldn't you? And it wasn't just planting. The harvest was also timed to the sky. Certain days, especially in the Tzolk'in, were deemed cutting days, perfect for reaping maize. Others were avoided entirely, even if the crops looked ready. You waited for a sign. This wasn't superstition. It was respect for rhythm, one quirky tradition. In some areas, the first harvested ears of corn weren't eaten. They were dressed in cloth and stored in a sacred corner of the home, not as trophies, but as guardians' reminders that the maize god had returned and should be honored. Think of them as holy leftovers with a job to do. You take a seat on a stone bench once used by elders, maybe even communal planners. It's not hard to picture them discussing the calendar over cups of chocolate, debating whether the stars were hinting at a dry season or a plague of worms. And if a comet appeared, well, that could mean anything from failed crops to the need for extra offerings. The sky always had a say. Historians still puzzle over how the Maya managed such agricultural precision in regions with thin soils and brutal rainy seasons. The answer, in part, lies in their integration of astronomy, ritual, and ecological adaptation. The stars told them when, the rituals told them how, and their agricultural engineering terraces, canals, chinampas ensured it all paid off. You walk now through the remnants of a granary, the stone base still holding firm. This was more than storage. It was the fruit of celestial timing. Every kernel of maize in this space represented a successful negotiation with time and weather and divine approval. The stars gave permission. The earth responded, and the people, they watched, they listened, They waited, because in the Maya world, farming wasn't seasonal, it was celestial. Next, we'll follow the legacy of all this sky watching. How Maya astronomy didn't vanish with the temples, but echoed forward, carried in language, stories, and even modern planting rituals. You make your way out of the fields now, leaving behind the ridged rose and rain-whispering stars, and head toward the low foothills where villages once huddled, warm with hearth smoke and laughter. The jungle breathes more freely here, the trees thin, and you start to notice something remarkable. Though the temples have crumbled, and the codices are mostly ash, and the kings long buried, the sky watching hasn't stopped. It's just changed its clothes. Tonight, we step into the echo of Mayan astronomy, the rhythms, beliefs, and celestial knowledge that quietly endured, not through monuments or formal observatories, but through story, ritual, and the kind of inherited knowledge that doesn't need paper. You stop in a modern village nestled along a dirt road, somewhere in Guatemala or southern Mexico. It's quiet, lit only by the moon and a flickering candle inside one thatched home. And inside, a woman is telling a child when to plant corn, not because she's read a book, but because her grandmother told her, and hers before that. And so on, like an unbroken chain of wisdom, stretching all the way back to Pakal and Venus. One of the most stunning facts, some contemporary Maya communities still plant and harvest according to astronomical signs. The appearance of Venus, the rising of certain stars just before dawn, the tilt of shadows at noon. These things still matter. They're not ancient curiosities. They're living tools. And while the formal names Hab, Tzolkin, long count might not be commonly spoken anymore, their rhythms remain. In highland towns, you'll still hear references to the 260-day sacred cycle. Babies born on certain days might still be given names tied to day signs. Midwives, healers, and local elders consult a sort of oral almanac to decide on auspicious times for travel, marriage, even building a new house. You pass a courtyard where children play beneath the stars, and one of them stops, points up, and says, "Ixik Venus." She knows. She may not calculate the 5 at 84-day cycle or plot its phases on bark paper, but she knows it matters. She's been told when it brings good luck, when to avoid travel, when to wake early, and offer a small handful of maize to the east. Historians still argue how much modern Mayan practice is authentic versus what's been influenced by colonial layers and modern religion. But that debate misses the point. The core survived. The reverence for the sky, the tracking of time, not by artificial clocks, but by the patterns above. The Maya didn't disappear. Their astronomy just moved indoors. In some towns, there are still daykeepers, individuals trained to carry and count the Tzolkin cycle. Not priests in the ancient sense, but more like community calendars wrapped in human form. They don't use telescopes. They use memory, ceremony, smoke, and yes, sometimes a smartphone app to double-check dates. Even ancient systems adapt. You sit on a wooden bench beside a fire pit and listen to an elder explain the meaning of an eclipse. It's when the jaguar takes a bite of the moon, he says, eyes twinkling. But if we light the fire and make enough noise, he lets it go. That belief predates telescopes by over 1,000 years. And yet here it is, still alive. One lesser-known detail. Some traditional healers in Maya communities time their remedies according to celestial signs. A tea brewed under a waning moon might serve a different purpose than one made during a Venus rising. The stars don't just speak to farmers and priests. They speak to the body. You walk through the village and come to a small chapel. Inside, Candles flicker before Catholic saints, but if you look closely, you'll see the old gods hiding. A feathered serpent embroidered into the altar cloth, a solar disk painted faintly behind a statue of Christ. This isn't contradiction, it's continuity. The stars still shine behind the new names. One story passed down in certain regions tells of a star that fell to earth and turned into maize. Another says that during the solstice, the sun rests catching its breath before beginning the climb back to summer. These aren't just pretty stories. They are encoded observations, just as powerful as a codex. You stand in a field of corn, nearly waist high now, and the wind rushes through it like whispered calendars. Somewhere nearby, someone's checking the sky for signs of rain. Not online, not with radar, just eyes, memory, and that instinct that hums in the bones of people whose ancestors once aligned whole cities to catch a sunrise. It's tempting to think the golden age of Maya astronomy ended when the temples were abandoned. But that's not quite right. The scribes are gone. Yes, the codices mostly lost. But the stars didn't stop shining, and the people didn't stop looking. What was once carved into stone is now spoken over fire, whispered in the kitchen, danced in festivals. Historians still debate how much was truly preserved and how much has been reshaped. But maybe that's what makes it more impressive. It survived anyway. Transformed, yes, but still deeply tied to the same stars that guided Pakal, that framed Kukulkan's descent, that flickered in the night skies above Chichen Itza and Copan. You sit one last time beneath the open sky, and you realize the Maya never needed telescopes to map the heavens. They needed time, patience, and stories. And those stories still walk the earth, under these stars, in the steps of every farmer who waits for Venus before planting, in every child who knows the moon has a jaguar inside, in every calendar, festival, and prayer that still points upward. Next, we'll return to the cityscape and explore how the Maya's view of the universe shaped their architecture from the ground up, from altars and courtyards to pyramids that reached for the stars. You leave the quiet village behind, where stories breathe across porches and smoke curls from hearths, and follow a winding path uphill. The jungle hushes again, as if stepping aside for something grand, and soon the trees part. And there it is, a city rising from the earth like a dream of stone. You've seen temples before, but this is something different. This is cosmology made solid. Because for the Maya, architecture wasn't just shelter or monument. It was a mirror of the universe. You step into a wide plaza, the stones underfoot warm from centuries of sun. Around you, temples rise at deliberate angles, their corners aligned with solstice shadows, their staircases tracing celestial movements. This is what it means to build from the sky downward, to shape your world in the image of the cosmos. You approach the base of a pyramid. It doesn't just sit in the landscape, it commands it. Its 4 staircases rise to meet at the top, echoing the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 winds, the 4 parts of the day. And the summit, that's not just the top, that's the axis mundi, the world center, the place where heaven and earth meet. Step onto that summit, and you're standing in the universe's front yard. This wasn't abstract for the Maya. Their entire worldview was built around layers: the underworld, the human world, the heavens above, and temples were designed to reflect those layers, with doorways representing portals, staircases mimicking the path of the sun, and roof combs reaching into the sky like leafy crowns. Historians still argue whether every building followed a strict cosmological code, or if it was more flexible, if some builders simply borrowed celestial themes because they were trendy. But the more ruins you explore, the more you see the pattern. cosmic order embedded in stone. You walk past a smaller structure that once served as an observatory. Its windows are positioned with uncanny precision. On certain days of the year, sunlight floods the chamber in straight, golden shafts touching glyphs, illuminating carvings, warming ceremonial altars. This is architecture with a calendar built in, a temple that knows the date better than your phone ever will. And it's not just about light. Sound plays a part too. At Chichen Itza, a clap at the base of the Temple of Kukulkan sends a chirp echoing back a sound that resembles the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe a deliberate acoustic design, meant to call the heavens with a single human sound. One lesser-known but fascinating feature, the placement of ball courts. Often located near the main temples, these weren't just arenas. Their orientation often mirrors celestial movements. Some scholars suggest that a ball court's long axis might align with Venus's setting point, or a specific constellation's rising. Play a game here, and you weren't just scoring points. You were reenacting the balance of the cosmos. You stop beside a ceremonial platform, where a series of stone markers are placed in a line. They aren't random. These are zenith markers, used to track the sun's path on the 2 days a year when the sun passes directly overhead, casting no shadow. Light would hit these markers in a perfect line. You can imagine a priest watching, waiting, noting the exact moment when the world held its breath. No shadow, just pure vertical sun. That moment wasn't just cool science. It was sacred balance, a brief alignment between the human world and the cosmic center, and it was baked into the architecture, because for the Maya, a city wasn't complete until it aligned with time itself. You walk through the remains of a palace courtyard, its layout eerily symmetrical at its heart. A circular altar around it, columns etched with glyphs and calendar dates. This wasn't just a meeting place. This was a miniature version of the cosmos, a place where rulers could sit at the center and feel the weight of heaven turning around them. And when they performed rituals, dances, bloodlettings, offerings, they weren't doing it in isolation. They were doing it at the exact intersection of space and time, when a shadow hit a wall or a star peaked above the horizon. Every motion, every chant, in sync with the universe. Historians still puzzle over how the Maya achieved such precision. Without compasses, without clocks, without GPS, just patience, shadow tracking, and a memory passed down through generations of sky watchers. And the results? Stone cities that function like celestial instruments, ticking once a year, or once every 52. You reach a small altar near the edge of the city. From this angle, you can see how the buildings don't just point at random. They frame the sky. One temple captures the sunset, another the Pleiades, another marks the moon's highest climb. These alignments weren't decorative. They were intentional, predictive, and powerful. One quirky theory proposes that some plazas were used like giant star maps, open spaces, where certain stars could be tracked as they moved between rooftops. A kind of walkable observatory, where the city itself told you the time of year. You sit now on a bench carved into a temple base, the stars unfolding above you like a well-worn scroll. And you realize something profound. To walk through a Mayan city wasn't just to visit homes, courts, and temples. It was to walk through a model of the universe, where every direction had meaning. Every structure had a skyward purpose, and every stone whispered a date. These cities were not static ruins. They were breathing calendars, built to catch starlight, swallow shadows, and speak with the sky. Next, we'll take one last upward gaze to consider how all of this temples, codices, calendars, and crops was powered by a mindset that saw no separation between the heavens and the earth. You lean back against the cool stone of that bench a little longer, listening to the low hum of crickets, and the quiet shift of nighttime leaves. The sky above still holds steady Venus gleaming just over the treetops. The Milky Way stretched like powdered sugar across the heavens. You followed the Maya through their fields and ball courts, through temples that bent light and stone into calendars. But now it's time to look at the core of it all. Not the architecture or the rituals themselves, but the way of thinking that powered it. Because what truly set the Maya apart was their refusal to separate sky and earth. For them, the cosmos wasn't up there, and the world down here. The two were one continuous system, constantly interacting, mirroring, and responding to each other. Time didn't just pass, it spoke, and it was your job to listen. You wander a little, past the edge of the plaza, and find a quiet spot beneath a broad ceiba tree. In Maya cosmology, the ceiba wasn't just a big leafy plant, it was the world tree, the very pillar that connected the underworld, the human world, and the heavens. Its roots dug deep into the realm of the dead. Its trunk held up our world, and its canopy touched the stars. So of course you'd find one planted in ceremonial centers, or carved into stelae, or painted across codices. The tree wasn't symbolic of the cosmos. It was the cosmos, and this kind of integration of making physical objects sacred, of giving symbolic meaning to the practical, is everywhere in Mayan thought. A mountain wasn't just a tall hill, it was a portal, a place where gods might dwell or enter the world. A cave, a passage to Xibalba, the underworld. And rain wasn't just water. It was a divine blessing delivered from celestial reservoirs, spilled by sky gods in moods both generous and wrathful. Historians still debate the extent to which this cosmological worldview was shared across all classes of Maya society. Did every farmer, every child, truly see the sky as a responsive, living force? Or was this the privilege of the priestly class? But even the tools of daily life pottery, grinding stones, weaving patterns carry star symbols, calendar glyphs, and sacred numbers. The evidence suggests this wasn't just elite theology. This was woven into everything. You find a stone bowl cracked in half by centuries of rain. Inside are faint carvings, numbers in dot and bar format, possibly referencing a date. Imagine grinding maize in that bowl, day after day, and being reminded that this action, this food, this moment is part of a cycle, part of a larger cosmic rhythm. Not mundane, but sacred. This mindset wasn't about control, it was about cooperation. The Maya didn't try to dominate nature. They tried to move in step with it. Rituals weren't bribes. They were conversations. Astronomy wasn't detached study. It was relationship maintenance with the stars. And the calendar, that complex, multi-tiered beast of numbers and sacred intervals. It wasn't just for planning. It was for naming, for storytelling, for aligning the visible world with the invisible one. A child born on 4 wasn't just born on a Tuesday. They were born under the sign of leadership, of endings and beginnings, of sun gods and ancestral echoes. That number, that name, it wasn't coincidence. It was destiny on a schedule. One quirky, beautiful detail. Some Maya believed your breath was a gift from the gods of wind and time. Every exhale, a celestial rhythm continuing through your body. You weren't just alive. You were a walking calendar, a piece of the stars made flesh. You glance at a glyph-covered wall, its surface chipped and mossy. One panel shows a god seated in a canoe, paddling through the sky. Another shows him descending through a crack in the ground. This isn't metaphor. This is how the Maya saw the world operating. The gods moved between realms. So did souls. So did time. Everything in flux, everything bound to cycles, not straight lines. And the temples, the observatories, the codices, they weren't attempts to pin down the universe like a bug in a display case. They were tools to move with it, to track its moods and pulses, and to know when to act, to plan, to marry, to sacrifice, to celebrate. The right moment could open a door, the wrong one could slam it shut. Historians still argue over how much of this system was science versus religion, but for the Maya, there was no distinction. A solstice shadow and a god's smile were the same thing, observed from different angles. Truth didn't have to be provable to be powerful. It had to be predictable, repeatable, woven into the seasons and the stars. You step into a smaller shrine now. Its roof collapsed, but its walls still etched with red paint and glyphs. It smells like earth and old time, and you can imagine someone kneeling here not in fear, but in awe, offering thanks for rain, or seeking a dream on a night when Venus blinked twice. And that's the beauty of the Maya worldview. It allowed the everyday to be holy. It treated the cornfield as an altar, the sunrise as a prophecy, the stars as teachers. You didn't need to climb a temple to connect with the cosmos. You just needed to look up, breathe out, and remember, you rest here a while, the jungle murmuring softly, the stars humming in their slow circuits. And you realize that the Maya didn't map the sky to feel powerful. They mapped it to feel present, anchored, connected to something vast and patterned and enduring. And somehow, in their cities of stone and ink, they built a cosmos you can still feel echoing through the trees. Next, we'll begin to gently bring it all together. How the stars and soil, the glyphs and gods, the temples and calendars formed a single, unified worldview that made the Maya not just sky watchers, but sky dancers. You stay seated a little longer in that shrine, listening not so much for sound as for rhythm, the hum of insects, the soft exhale of breeze across leaves, the drip of water somewhere in the stones. It all pulses like breath, like time itself stretching out and folding back in again. Because that's what the Maya truly saw, not chaos in the cosmos, but pattern and the invitation to step into it, to be not just a watcher of stars, but a dancer within their rhythm. As you begin walking again, through the open plaza and between shadowy walls, the city around you begins to feel different. Not like ruins, but like the frozen motion of a grand, celestial performance. Every building here was part of that dance, a stage for the sun, a partner to the moon, a step in a sequence measured not in beats or seconds, but in katuns and baktuns. This wasn't an accident. Maya civilization was built on the principle that everything had a right time. The planting of corn, the birth of a child, the crowning of a king, the start of a battle, even a breath, even a heartbeat. Each moment had its place in a cosmic sequence so intricate and layered that we're still deciphering it. And all of it was connected. The Tolkien sacred calendar counted your spiritual day name. The Hob told you when to expect the rains. The long count tracked the great cycles of existence. The stars marked when to act. The temples echoed their light. And beneath it all, rituals hummed in sync with the universe like choreography taught by time. Historians still debate how the Maya managed to keep it all so tightly woven. There are theories of elite knowledge hoarded by priest astronomers, and others of communal memory passed through chant and gesture. The truth likely lies somewhere between, a society that lived in cycles, where the spiritual and scientific were so entangled, they never needed to be untangled. You pause now at a circular stone marker, its face etched with overlapping glyphs. One ring counts days, another months, another Venus cycles. It looks almost like a clock. If a clock could tell you when the gods are watching more closely than usual, this was no novelty. It was an interface between humans and time. The Maya didn't just observe patterns, they embedded themselves into them. That's the key to understanding why their cities were laid out like calendars, why temples framed solstice light, why ball games mimicked celestial battles. They weren't recreating the cosmos, they were living inside it. You walk to the center of a plaza now, once used for communal gathering, music, ceremony, Here, stories would be told, some of gods, others of star-born kings, and some of the moments when the heavens misbehaved. A comet streaking by, a solar eclipse, or the haunting silence that comes just before an earthquake. In those moments, the Maya didn't look for blame. They looked for alignment. What had fallen out of rhythm? What step had been missed in the dance? One lesser-known tradition speaks of sky songs, not literal music, but ritual recitations patterned to reflect celestial cycles. Priests might chant the 260-day sequence of the Tzolk'in, or recite the names of Venus's phases, not as memory exercises, but as acts of harmony, keeping time not with drums, but with syllables. Even language echoed the cosmos. The Maya word for breath also meant life force and spirit. The word for sun shared roots with lord and rule. Their cosmology wasn't just carved in stone, it was spoken into being every day. In every village, every home, every field, you pause by a weathered mural, figures dancing in a circle, arms raised, with stars overhead and roots beneath their feet. It's a literal picture of Maya worldview, humans grounded in earth, reaching toward the heavens, and always moving in step with both. This dance wasn't just metaphorical. During festivals, entire cities would participate in ritual choreography. Some involved slow, deliberate steps through plazas timed to the calendar. Others were celebratory, swirling around altars as fires roared and drums pulsed. But all had timing, and meaning, and memory. Even modern Maya communities hold on to fragments of that choreography. Solstice festivals, naming ceremonies tied to day signs, rain-calling dances that mimic the fall of water and the growth of maize. The dance never stopped. It just shifted into quieter steps. You return now to a platform you visited earlier, standing on its summit, looking out over the city's bones. The stars overhead haven't moved much, but they're always moving. That was the Maya's genius, not in locking the heavens into fixed maps, but in understanding that everything turns slowly, predictably, eternally. Historians sometimes get caught up in asking whether Maya astronomy was correct. Did they calculate eclipses with accuracy? Did they know about the precession of the equinoxes? Were their star names aligned with ours? But maybe those aren't the right questions. Maybe the real brilliance lies not in accuracy, but in attunement, in building a worldview that made people feel like they belonged in the turning of the sky. That feeling of rhythm, of pattern, of sacred alignment is still here, woven into the vines, baked into the stone, whispered by the stars. And if you sit quietly enough, for long enough, you'll feel it too. The gentle pull of time, not forward like an arrow, but around you like a circle. Next, we'll step into the twilight of Maya, stargazing the final days of the great observatories, and ask what happened when the skies darkened. The codices burned, and the calendar stopped being carved in stone. You linger a moment longer on the temple summit, gazing out at the dark tapestry of jungle and stars, but something in the air feels heavier now. Not in the sky, which still pulses with steady rhythm, but in the ground beneath your feet. The stones are still warm, still true, but the silence that hangs over them isn't ceremonial. It's historical. You've reached the part of the story where things begin to fall quiet, where the dances slow, the carvings stop, and the sky no longer shines from the top of the pyramid. This is the twilight of Maya astronomy, not a sudden end, but a long, shadowed dimming. You descend the steps slowly, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat between the stones. The cities you visited, Copan, Palenque, Yaxchilan, Tikal, they all flourished with sky-bound focus, but one by one, over centuries, their stargazing towers grew cold. The long count stopped ticking on monuments. Priests fell silent. The calendars, once carved with precision, were left unfinished. Historians still debate why. Environmental stress, droughts, political collapse, trade disruption, likely all of it. The classic, Maya world didn't end, it fractured. Over time, like a slow eclipse dimming the heart of a civilization, you stop at a broken stele, cracked down the middle. Its glyphs trail off, the calendar count stopping mid-sentence. Not erased, just abandoned. Not forgotten, just left behind. And it wasn't just cities. Codices vanished. The vast libraries of bark paper books, so carefully calculated, painted, and passed down, were swept up and set to flame during the Spanish conquests. One friar, Diego de Landa, famously confessed to burning dozens, maybe hundreds of Maya texts because they were filled with superstition and the devil's lies. Only 4 survive today. 4. You pass through what was once a priest's chamber. The niches where codices would have been stored, now home to moss and lizards. There are no scrolls here anymore, but the walls still whisper. The Maya didn't rely only on books. Their knowledge was lived, embedded in rituals, architecture, memory. So when the codices burned, the knowledge didn't vanish. It simply changed form. But even so, something deep was lost. In many places, the observatories fell silent. Temples once timed to Venus or the equinox no longer hosted ceremonies. The alignment was still there. The architecture didn't forget. But the people were forced to focus elsewhere on survival, resistance, adaptation. And still, they held on to fragments. A day name here, a ritual there, a sense that the stars were watching. Even if you couldn't write their names anymore, you sit now beside a collapsed staircase, its stones scattered like calendar pages in the wind. And you wonder, what would it feel like to live at the very end of the old calendar? To be the last stargazer in a city that no longer followed the heavens. One lesser-known detail. In some areas, Maya people tried to hide their sky knowledge, burying codices or carving glyphs into places only they could find. They knew what was coming, and they resisted in the way they could by preserving the pattern. Even in silence, others adapted. In the highlands, Maya communities blended their sky traditions with new religious practices. They assigned new names to the same old stars. A Venus rising became a saint's festival. A solstice became a celebration of light. And behind the veil of Christian prayer, the old rhythms kept ticking. Historians still argue whether this period marks a collapse or a transformation. The temples were no longer built, the monuments no longer raised, but the people endured. They carried the sky in their stories, in their hands, in the way they looked up at dawn. You pass a rough wall near the edge of the plaza, where a few faint glyphs remain. They're hard to read, weathered nearly flat by time. But you can just make out a calendar round, a name, a day, a date. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet record of presence. I was here, the stars were above. And time, even now, moves forward. And here's what stuns you. The last long count date we have on a stela. It falls around 909 CE. And then the record stops. Not because time ended, but because the chisel was laid down, but the sky didn't stop. Venus still rose, the moon still swelled and waned, and in hidden corners of the Maya world, someone, maybe a grandmother, maybe a wandering priest, maybe a child with questions, kept watching. You close your eyes and picture that. The last Maya astronomer stepping onto a temple summit, unrolling a codex for the final time, tracing Venus's position in the sky, and then, without ceremony, walking away. But even in that walk, the wisdom wasn't lost. It just moved into bones, into blood, into story. And the temples, they waited. Quiet, yes? Forgotten. No, the stone doesn't forget the sky. It just grows still. Next, we'll enter the final full night of our journey, watching how this incredible legacy, almost extinguished, was eventually remembered, reclaimed, and reignited. One star at a time, you rise from the broken plaza, with the heaviness of the last section still folded around your shoulders like dusk. The stones are quieter here, the vines are thicker, but there's something else too. A subtle shift in the air. Not quite hope, not yet. More like memory beginning to stir. Because even though the stargazers laid down their tools, even though the codices were burned and the cities fell quiet, the Maya world did not vanish. It waited, hidden in hills, humming in rituals, whispered through lullabies, and eventually, slowly, stubbornly, beautifully, it began to re-emerge. Tonight, you walk through a different kind of temple, one not carved in stone. But in rediscovery, the 20th and 21st centuries haven't just brought archaeologists into the jungle with trowels and tripods. They've also brought Maya communities back into their own cosmic archives, reclaiming a worldview that once hummed in every plaza, now pulsing again in classrooms, ceremonies, and even astronomy conferences. Yes, astronomy, because that ancient, intricate system of sky math, it's still being studied, not just by outsiders, but by Maya scholars. In places like Guatemala and the Yucatan, young Maya students are learning to read glyphs again, to count the Tzolk'in days, to calculate Venus cycles not as lost relics, but as living knowledge. You arrive in a small town where a ceremony is taking place, not a reenactment, not a tourist display, but a genuine new fire ritual, adapted to modern life. Candles flicker in a spiral pattern. Copal smoke rises like incense did 1,000 years ago. Elders chant day names while children watch, wide-eyed. It feels timeless. And here's the wonder. These practices are now being reconnected to their astronomical roots. Scholars are pairing oral tradition with codex fragments, aligning remembered rituals with solar and lunar events. In some communities, you'll find traditional daykeepers consulting both inherited wisdom and astronomical software. One quirky but deeply cool fact. Some Maya daykeepers now use mobile apps built specifically to track the Tzolk'in, a pocket-sized codex. Grandparents scrolling through Venus phases, the cosmos reborn in pixels. Historians still debate how closely these revivals match pre-Columbian practice. But maybe that's not the point. These are cultural resurrections, not carbon copies. The sacred calendar is being breathed back to life. One chant, one glyph, one remembered shadow at a time. You pause beside a new monument, New, built not in 800 CE, but in the last decade. Carved in traditional style by local artisans, it marks a day in the Maya calendar. A wedding, a festival, a solstice, not an artifact, a statement. We are still here. Our time has not ended. This echoes in academia, too, where once Maya astronomy was filtered entirely through the eyes of colonial chroniclers or foreign archaeologists. Now Maya voices lead the way. Linguists, epigraphers, and cultural historians with Maya ancestry are decoding inscriptions, publishing calendars, and teaching the sacred math that once flowed only from temple summits. And perhaps the most powerful rediscovery of all, that the Maya were never lost, just listened to less. Their calendars kept ticking, their sky kept turning, and their people, even when silenced, kept watching. You walk into a small museum curated by locals, filled with both ancient stelae and modern textile art. Here, a hand-woven huipil glows with embroidered glyphs. There, a clay dish is etched with a day sign and a phase of the moon. Art and astronomy, still partners. One elderly guide smiles as she points out constellations in a mural, not Western ones. But Maya interpretations, the rattlesnake, the turtle, the jaguar. For a moment, you realize how arbitrary our sky maps are. The stars are neutral. It's how we see them that gives them shape. And the Maya, they saw them with a poet's logic and a farmer's eye. Even tourists. It turns out, are part of the revival. Many Maya guides now incorporate traditional astronomical knowledge into tours explaining solstice alignments, eclipse tables, and long-count math with the confidence of someone whose ancestors counted time by starlight. This isn't nostalgia, it's reclamation. You return to the plaza, where a small group begins to form around a circular fire pit. Someone strikes a match. Copal begins to burn. The spiral of candles flickers once again. You're not in 800 CE. You're in the now, and yet nothing feels out of place. Because the Maya didn't build a past. They built a continuum, a way of seeing time not as an arrow, but as a circle you could step into at any point. And tonight, you've stepped in. One lesser-known revival effort involves teaching children the sacred calendars in both Quiche and Spanish, encouraging bilingual cosmology modern life paired with ancestral rhythm. That's not preservation. That's growth. Not a museum exhibit, but a life lived in time with the stars. You sit near the fire, listening, as someone begins to chant the day signs I mix. Ik, Akbal, Khan. And the cadence wraps around you like music, like breath. Each name a beat in the great, ongoing rhythm. And for a moment, you're not just hearing history, you're inside it. The stars above haven't changed. Venus still rises and falls. The moon still swells and fades. But down here, on Earth, the watchers have returned. The glyphs speak again. The temples hum. And time, as always, turns. Next, we'll close our journey by drifting through a final night softly, slowly bringing everything together in a quiet wind down. Beneath the same stars the Maya once followed home. You sit quietly now, the fire down to glowing coals, its flickering heartbeat echoing softly across the plaza floor. The stars are still wide awake above you, bright and ancient, but everything else is beginning to slow. Your breath, your thoughts, even the shadows around the stones seem to settle, like they know the story is nearly done. Tonight, you've walked more than ruins. You've walked through a worldview, a way of being, that doesn't separate the practical from the sacred, or the stars from the soil. You've followed the Maya from codices to cornfields, from serpent-shaped shadows to solstice altars, from planetary cycles to the silence after the scribes were gone. And through it all, you've seen the same steady truth. The Maya didn't just watch the sky, they moved with it. Now, beneath this same sky, your journey draws to a close. Not with a bang, but with a hush. The final embers of the fire curl upward like a prayer, a breath, a glyph unspoken. The city around you rests not ruined, not dead, just deeply asleep, like a calendar folded closed, like a temple waiting for the sun to rise and wake it again. You remember the long count, ticking on through centuries. You remember the Hab, counting solar days, and the Tzolkin, looping with sacred rhythm. You remember Venus, always returning, always reminding, and above all, you remember the dance the way every building, every ritual, every whisper of smoke and corn and candle was part of the same pattern. And here, at the end of the story, it becomes clear the Maya never stopped speaking to the sky. They simply changed the way they listened. So now, as you rest beneath these stars, let the echoes of the ancient clocks lull you. Let the shadow of Kukulkan's descent slow your thoughts. Let the remembered rhythm of day names and moonrise lullabies carry you just a little further. You're still part of the pattern. After all, the plaza is empty now. The fires have all gone out. The jungle has gone quiet, save for the gentle whisper of night creatures stretching in the dark. Above you, the constellations spin in their timeless rhythm so slow, so certain, so familiar. You lie back on the warm stone, arms folded behind your head, letting your breath match the turning of the world. There is nothing left to do. No kings to crown, no stars to track, no numbers to calculate. The calendar can keep spinning without you tonight. The wind sighs through the trees like an old lullaby. The sky leans in, vast and velvet, brushing your cheek with cool air. The world feels slower now, simpler, wiser. Time, like the Maya knew all along, isn't something to chase. It's something to step into, to dance with, to be held by. You've seen the temples, you've counted the stars, you've walked through silence and story alike. Now, let it all go. Let the rhythm settle deep in your chest. Let the stars hum quietly overhead. Let sleep come softly, like a shadow gliding down the side of a temple, slow and inevitable. The story is still moving, but for tonight, you don't have to. Thank you. The stars will still be turning when you wake. Sleep deeply, dream slowly, and may your night be as peaceful as a sky without clouds. Sweet dreams.